What's up, everyone? It is officially Halloween. Originally, I was going to do a live stream, but some stuff happened, and now I am taking some younger family members out trick-or-treating. So, in lieu of that, here is a compilation of some crazy encounters that I've done this year. Pull up a stump, and let's jump into it. Happy Halloween. Over the years, I've become floored by how many people have had experiences with crawlers. No doubt, a lot of reports and videos are either fakes or people jumping into the meme of it all. Sometimes, it can be just another animal that appears weird on camera. But I've had two experiences that I absolutely cannot explain. And even though I browse the internet a lot, I'm not really one to take this stuff at face value. I've racked my brain trying to think of a known animal that fit the color, texture, morphology, and gait, and come up with nothing every time. Both of these are in Canada, one in Nova Scotia and another in Ontario. So first, the Nova Scotia one. It's February 2021. I was living and working on a homestead with a good friend. We were on the South Shore, outside of Lunenburg. One day, I decided to drive up to the Bay of Fundy, across the province, one Saturday. The bay is due north, along a rural county highway, around 100 kilometers. Nova Scotia has the same geography as Maine. It's part of Appalachia. The highway rises toward the uplands, and then plunges into a valley. Similar upland on the other side of the valley, and then the bay. Spring can come early down east. It's a mild, overcast day. The weather holds until we start to head back. At around 7 p.m., it starts to rain very hard. We climb the first set of uplands. The rain turns to sleet. Into the valley, it's now snowing quite hard. We cross the valley, and the snow is torrential, walnut-sized East Coast snowflakes. We get over the second upland, and I'm beginning to worry. I was raised in Ontario. I was used to heavy snow, but this is bad. At this point, it's very dark. We were cruising down the highway in my 4x4 truck with winter tires. Despite the equipment and experience, we were limping along at 10 feet of visibility. We were going about 40 kilometers an hour in an 80 zone. Nobody was around. We were well on our way home now, and the highway dips into a wetland area. It's a muskeg or bog type of environment, a mire with black spruces. The highway passes over an area that has a huge culvert, and 10 feet ahead of us, something runs from my left side, my driver's side, to the right. A humanoid shape, emaciated, bright white, even against the snow. It looks between my height and my bro's. He's 5'8", I'm 6'3", so somewhere in between there. It's loping, biped, on all fours, and it has a gait like a human bent over. Its ass is in the air, its legs kick back as it gallops, alternating arms and legs. We were struck by how fast it moved. It seemed frenzied and excited. I didn't see a face, but the color and texture immediately made me feel sick. I was genuinely terrified. I spent many years outdoors, and I'm very comfortable out on the sticks at night. Instinctively, I locked the doors. 5 or 10 good seconds pass before I squeak out, "Did you see that?" My bro says, "What did you see?" Clearly, we are both on the same page. He's the opposite of a paranormal guy like I am. He doesn't have any interest whatsoever in spooky shit. The whole trip now has a dark, eerie vibe. It's very oppressive and threatening. I speed up despite the road danger, the hair standing all over my body. We drive in silence most of the way home. Clearly, we're feeling the same. Once we're close to home, a more temperate microclimate, it's raining again. We pick up something to eat. We're still not really speaking. We go home and go to bed. I could barely sleep that night. The next morning, I asked a Micmac medicine woman friend if she had ever heard of that. She was very visibly bothered that we asked, and said that she didn't want to talk about it at all. I never did get an answer out of her. Nova Scotia is known for weird shit, but that was my first experience as such. I remember that it was just north of Springfield Lake that we had seen it. I felt a little better once I saw the lights of people's homes, and by Google mapping the terrain nearby to find the closest bog, I've settled on it being around 1933 Nova Scotia, Trunk 10. And now, the Ontario encounter. This happened a few years before the one in Nova Scotia. I was 19 or 20. I was drinking with some friends out in the woods. We were in southwestern Ontario, out of the side of Kitchener-Waterloo. My friends and family still live nearby, so I'm not going to give a precise location in case some weirdo decides to go looking for my family. So we were out behind my best friend's house. It's a damp cedar forest with lots of bogs. The whole gang is cooked and walking back from the oak savanna where we have fires. We were moving along the boardwalk, probably 15 of us. I haven't had that much to drink, but most of the group is wasted and stoned. I bring up the rear for our safety. The woods are dark and hard to navigate. I feel fine. I'm enjoying the night and my 3-beer buzz. I happen to swing a flashlight to the right of the boardwalk. I catch something darting through the grassier part of the wetland. I thought it was a deer, but I stop when I realize that something strange. It's white. I thought for a moment that it was a piebald deer, and then I stop again. It's simply too white. It appears to have skin, and it's man-sized. The gait and posture are wrong, but it looks bipedal, but on all fours. Its ass is sticking up, and it seems to be trotting or marching like a happy dog. There was lots of rolling hip action, almost like a skunk or marmot as it ambles away from my light. Immediately, I feel my voice catch in my throat as immense primal fear grips me. Suddenly I realize that if I cry out, the whole group of drunk dumbasses will scatter. Creature aside, confused drunks are going to fall in and be swimming, stuck in thickets. Horrified, but silently, I keep following the group as I swing my flashlight around. I'm constantly shoulder checking and looking left and right until we get out of that forest and onto the road. I never saw it again. It never tried to pursue us. It seemed afraid, or at least avoidant of us. I told my buddy about it the next day, and we shat bricks about it together. Interestingly enough, while a lot of crawler reports seem to come from caves or mountainous areas, both of mine were from flatlands. Even though Nova Scotia is on Appalachian rock, there's not much more than hills. It's mostly rocky plains and uplands, but both experiences were near bogs and wetlands. It seems the areas may also attract whatever these things are. When I was 38, I decided to move out into a little cabin. I won't get into it, but I had made a lot of money from a job that basically had me working 24/7. And after making this money, I wanted not much to do with other people for a long time. But back to the cabin. I set up my furniture and stuff. I stocked food for months. I planned to not have to move or go anywhere for at least 6 months. There's no neighbors or anyone else for miles and miles. I decide to explore the trail in the woods and check out around to get a good feel of the lay of the land for my new home. I follow a super long trail. I come across a random wooden pole in the middle of the woods. While inspecting it, I look up and notice that there's 4 nooses attached to it. There's nothing on them, but there's weird, black stuff all around it, on the nooses and on the pole. And then suddenly, I realize that there's no sounds around me. There's just silence. No bugs or birds or anything. So I turn around and just decide to leave the whole area and maybe avoid it. But then when I get back, my door is absolutely shredded and all of my food is gone. All the food I had left on the table is also gone. I have to drive an hour or two just to find a store to get more food. I also end up driving around more and buy a rifle. I go home. I go to sleep. I have some more weird happenings from that cabin. I still don't know who or what took my food. I'm still mad because that cost a lot of money. But anyways, some time passes. Eventually I want to set up a fishing spot near this swampy, bayou-ish area. I'm a huge fan of fishing. I finally get a boat ready, and I make sure that my home is secure, and I set off. I got my fishing pole and everything. 3 hours in, I've caught about 5 fish, and I'm getting ready to pack up and go home. It's about 7 p.m. And then I hear this noise come from the woods. If I ever tried to mimic it, it wouldn't do it any justice. But it's like, you know those videos you find online where they take a sound and they slow it down by 800 times and it sounds really creepy and really eerie. It was like one of those. It kind of sounded like wolves, almost. But there was something with it that just did not sound right. It was like it was too deep. And at the end of the noise, it almost sounds like a demon and Darth Vader are having sex or something. Terrified, I don't know what to do. I stay on the boat, or do I book it back home? I look over, near the area of where my house would be, and suddenly, something reeks. I start to gag. I'm fully aware that I'm in a bayou area, but this smelled worse than anything. I end up vomiting in the water, and I scream, "What the F?" And suddenly, the smell's gone. The sounds are gone. After an hour, I get up the courage to go back home. I'm resting in bed, watching TV, and I get this weird feeling on the back of my neck. The smell comes back. I end up vomiting again. And then, from far off in the woods, I hear someone, not me, yell, "What the F?" And then suddenly, the smell's gone. I grab my rifle and I hug it like a teddy bear while I go to sleep. After this, for a long time nothing happened. I was beginning to think that it was just a fever dream. But then I had an encounter with something that I call my neighbor, who I bumped into one morning. I was walking along a totally different trail, and then I hear some footsteps. I hear, "Hey, hey, who are you?" I turn around, looking. I don't see anybody. And then I hear the same phrase again. I'm looking everywhere, wildly, even up in the trees, and I don't see anybody. And then I hear, "Hey man, hey, who are you?" Not in a deep voice, but not in the most high-pitched one either. After hearing the same phrase for 10 minutes, I'm beginning to get really scared. And then I hear, "Hey," 2 inches from my ear, and then, "Have you seen my body?" And Lord have mercy, I ran faster than a jet back home. It seems like every now and again, almost in regular intervals, that stuff happens around that cabin. It seems to almost leave me alone for a long time, and then come back really strong, scare the hell out of me, and then leave again. Anyone have any insight on the events around my home? So I was in Boy Scouts well into my teens, and the summer before I quit, I went to a summer camp in a muggy Florida marsh savanna area. If you've ever been to Florida in the summer, you'll know that it gets ridiculously hot, humid, and rainy. So the summer camp was a complete disaster, weather-wise. But me and a few of my friends didn't like it for a very different reason. Now each camp had a colossal pavilion in the center, surrounded by assorted palmettos and tents. These tents were A-frame style, permanent tents atop rotting pallets, which made the whole camp look like an abandoned military base. These A-frames were made of disgusting 20-year-old tarps that insulated really well. This was a nightmare in South Florida because moisture plus heat would stay in each tent and make each night a living hell for its residents. Add mosquitoes the size of your ball sack, and the entire campout was a disaster. Not to mention our scoutmaster was a giant douche, so he made us earn a minimum of 10 merit badges that week, so we had to attend 10 of his classes to earn them. These classes took place in screened pavilions around the main mess hall at the center of the giant campground. Some of the bigger merit badges like whittling or archery took place next to the mess hall, and the smaller, less important ones, bird watching and electricity, were only accessed by a single dirt trail and a 10-minute walk. And our whole troop had these inner circle groups, like kind of clubs, that we could all earn our merit badges with. We called ours the Blind Koalas, or some other stupid name, just so that we could have a koala bear with glasses and a cane flying over our camp. We thought it was hilarious, and that we were jokesters and stuff. But anyways, I convinced my fellow koalas to take 10 super easy merit badges so we could get done early, and we snuck our Game Boy Advances into camp so we could hang out in the woods and play our new Pokemon games. This was around the time that Ruby and Sapphire had just come out. My parents were all for it, so we did just that. We snuck out really far into the woods, outside the camp, off the regular path, and into the savannah. We made it out about 3, but before we started to play our games, where no one could find us, we saw this really run-down house. And when I say house, I don't mean a cabin, or even a concrete block where the Rangers live. I mean a full-on chimney and porch, suburban home, just plopped in the middle of the woods, like a bad Photoshop, with no roads leading up to it. The whole place would have looked perfect had it not looked like that Father Time took a huge dump on it. It was kind of blocked by some pine trees, so we didn't see it coming out. We went up to the window on its porch and peeked inside. Boxes, piled above eye level, filled the entire house. No furniture or anything, just boxes of what appeared to be magazines, newspapers, and other printed material. The only other thing besides those boxes was a broken wheelbarrow leaning against a window on the opposite side. We were about to open the door to go inside, no matter how scared we were, because we wanted to check out those boxes. Then, the most blood-curdling noise ever came from the house. The only way I can describe it is like someone twanging a piano wire from inside the piano, so it came out as a twang, twang, twang. It was so unnatural and unnerving that we booked it the hell out of there and ran back to the mess hall. Apparently, we had been gone for 2 hours, but we could swear it was 5 minutes. The sun hadn't even changed in the sky. They kept saying that it was 5:30, but the sun was barely where it would be at 3. It didn't go down until 8 p.m. that night for some reason. It got worse though, so much worse. When it got dark that night, it got really dark. At 8, the sun just barely disappeared over the horizon. At 9, you wouldn't even have remembered what the sun looked like. We kept the fire going to try and calm our nerves after that house we found yelled at us. Eventually, we had enough Slim Jims and ghost stories that we went to our grotty-ass A-frames. I was kind of a chubby kid back then, so I was eaten alive by mosquitoes every night, and I had placed a mosquito net over my cot to save me from their wretched onslaught. It did minimal amounts of protecting and acted as more of a shitty curtain. I tried going to sleep, but it was just so hot in the A-frame. I had to remove everything but my boxer briefs just to stay cool. About 2 in the morning, I think I hear a loud thonk from the tent next over. I jolt upright and tangle myself in my net and scramble on the rotting pallet to free myself. I fall through and fall into the conveniently placed ant pile underneath the pallet. I manage to save myself before I get eaten, but I was so groggy and so much adrenaline through my bloodstream that I barely knew what was going on before I heard another loud thonk a foot away. The A-frame had collapsed on top of me and my bunkmate. We crawled out from underneath. I looked next door to see the other A-frames and watched them fall like dominoes, each with a sickening thonk as the pillars that held them up fell down. I could barely make out a single tall figure in red and white dart from behind of one of the tents to another, but I couldn't tell. It was too early in the morning to make a positive ID. It was chaos. My whole troop had collapsed A-frames. The entire pillar to erect the thing was broken. The piece that was to slide into the pallet had been snapped clean off. Now these A-frames were old, but it's still difficult to break a 4x4 block of wood with one swipe. I ran out in my boxer briefs to try and make sure that everyone was okay, and we told our douche scoutmaster that someone had knocked down every A-frame in the camp. We marched down to the camp ranger and told him. He said that he'll go out and help us find the guy who did it. About an hour later, the camp director drives up in a jeep with some short, fat kid in a black ninja outfit in the back. He tells us that the kid confessed to knocking them over, and this is a mystery solved. Everyone came forth and called BS, mostly because the agreed upon profile for our suspect was a tall, probably 6'5" or so, lean guy in red and white. The ranger waved it off as some kind of joke and said that he had a confession that he was going to get everything sorted out by morning. We tried finding the house again the next day, but we couldn't find it. It's almost like it just wasn't there. I was about to shrug and just say screw it when my friend, who was in the first A-frame to get knocked over, came up to me at dinner on the last night. He was kind of nervous to talk to me, and he hasn't really been himself. He told me that he smelled something really bad before he woke up that morning. He looked up and saw the figure staring at him, and he thought it was the weirdest thing. It was a person. It didn't seem to be a spooky skeleton or anything like that, but the guy was obscenely tall, with lanky arms that hung down by his side. He smelled like straight death. He said by the little bit of skin that he could see, it was old-looking and gray. But the weirdest thing was that he was wrapped up in bandages and a headdress, just like a mummy. A mummy in South Florida. I laughed it off and told him that it was just some asshole screwing with us. He sighed and continued to eat his gloop scout food. But the weirdest thing didn't start until after we all came home from camp. There were 10 people who had their tents knocked over, excluding me and my bunkmate. And out of those 10, 8 of them had burglars clean their place out while we were at camp. Only myself and the kid who thought he saw a mummy were spared. His house burned down a month later. The fire department were saying that somebody had thrown incendiary devices into the windows at night while they were sleeping. But the problem was, they had no broken glass, no open windows, no open doors, no electrical issues. The house just burnt up. Nothing has really happened to my house. I moved a couple of months after dropping scouts anyways, and the last I heard, my old house was still there. I honestly have no idea what any of this means, but it's creepy to put together and to think about. No one I know from that troupe is still in it. They dropped out around the same time I did. I heard we all dropped a ton of weight too. None of us are chubby anymore, and I've been told that I look too skinny now. Did we all drop scouts for the same reason? Maybe. I have no idea what to expect from it, or all of these events. And I know it's kind of shitty to end a story like this, but this is it. The only other creepy thing is that I find ants in my stuff all the time, and it's super annoying. I like to think that it has something to do with this, like we've all been cursed by some entity, but in reality, I don't know. Another weird thing is that I get bit a lot, and I don't know where the bites come from. I have to cover myself with band-aids sometimes because they itch so much. But yeah, that's just another thing that doesn't make sense, along with the mummy in South Florida. This is something from my late childhood that still sticks with me. I had no close neighbors when I lived with my parents. It was just miles and miles of forest. There was a creek and a little valley or gully below the house. I used to play there with our super dog, a German Shepherd. And as we're playing, suddenly the dog starts acting weird, nervous almost. He barks at me, almost as if saying, "Come on, bro, we have to go home. Something's not right." So he leaves. He comes back, looks at me, takes a few steps away, comes back again, and then leaves. The dog is gone. I think, whatever, the dog is just being weird, and I keep looking for crawdads in this creek. And then I hear, "Hi, you're new." This scares me. I fall in the creek, and then I hear happy little girl giggling. And then I turn around, and it's the prettiest little girl that I have ever seen in my life, standing there on the edge of the clearing. She says, "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," and says that her name is Becca. She looks my age, give or take a year. It never occurs to me, or at least I didn't care, that I probably should have seen her at school. But to me, she was so pretty that she bypassed that young kid cootie zone. She had long, jet black hair, green eyes, and was wearing tomboy clothes, a plain white t-shirt, cut-off blue jeans, and in her bare feet. It's literally still burned into my mind. My 8-year-old game kicks in. I tell her that I'm catching crawdads to put into my aquarium. I ask her if she wants to come to my house and see it. She says, "How far is it?" I tell her that it's just up over the hill. And she says, "Oh," and looks confused. It must be new. She climbs up this big beechnut tree in the clearing that sort of grows across the creek at an angle. The more she laughs and giggles and talks, the more I'm just enamored with her. I tell her that we moved in 3 years ago, so yeah, I guess the house is pretty new. She says, "Oh, just over that hill?" and points. I explained that yeah, and you just go on and out of the woods. It's not that far. And then she says, "My mom says that I'm not supposed to leave the woods." And even back then, this ticked an alarm bell. I thought that's really weird. But we keep talking. I'm already a bit of a geek, so I'm just talking about frogs and crawdads and comic books, Star Wars, and everything else. She doesn't say very much about these things, but she just seems happy to listen. She tells me where to look for what she calls the good crawdads. I'm stunned that she hasn't seen Star Wars. I tell her the whole story. She's fascinated. I'm fascinated by her. Eventually, it begins to get dark. I tell her that I have to go home. She seems kind of sad and begs me to stay a little longer and talk. She asks, "Do you know any more stories?" I tell her I do, but I really do have to go. I promise to come back the next day and bring some of my comic books and lightsabers. She seems legitimately excited. As I'm leaving the clearing, I turn back to look at her again and say,
See you tomorrow. But she's already gone. I get home. My mom notices that I'm acting different and asks me what's put me in such a good mood. I lie and say that it's just I found some really nice crawdads for my tank. I didn't get it then, but I do now. I essentially had a kid secret romance. It was really brewing, and telling anybody would ruin it. The next day was Saturday. My mom and dad were sleeping in. I get up early by sheer force of will and sneak some comics and toys out my window. I start my chores, hide my bag in the edge of the woods, and cut the grass. I tell my parents that I'm going to go to the creek, and I feel like I'm floating all the way there. Becca is already there in the tree. She drops flower petals in to bait the fish. She prances all over, excited to see what I've brought. Immediately, she's fixated on the lightsabers. We play fight for hours. I teach her how to make lightsaber noises. We chase each other through the woods, laughing and having a great time. It's one of the fondest memories of my childhood. She's better than me, quicker. She runs faster than me, and she's not even wearing shoes. Later, I sit under the beechnut tree and read comics to her. She likes me to do the voices, so I read and point while she looks over my shoulder at the pictures, and later I realize she's wearing the same clothes. Then later I realize again that she can't seem to read. Eventually, it's lunchtime. I hear my mom calling me off in the distance. Becca looks scared. I don't understand why, but I don't say anything. I ask her if she wants to come over for lunch. She gets sad and says that she should go. I get a little frustrated without understanding why. She hugs me and makes me promise that I'll come back the next day and bring more of my funny books. I go home, happy, but confused. This is the closest I'll ever come in my life to actual bliss. My parents both knew that there was something up with me, that I'm keeping something secret. They let me keep it. Weeks pass like this. I spend more and more time deep in the woods. We play and fish, and she listens to me read. My parents let me keep my secrets, but they're getting worried, asking questions, glancing at each other at my answers. A day comes when we're reading. Becca shushes me. She says, "Somebody's coming." She runs off in the woods before I can say anything. I want to call out for her to come back, but now I can hear someone coming too. It's my dad. He's smiling, but his eyes aren't. He asks me what I'm up to. I know that they won't believe me, but I lie anyway. I say that I just like to read here. He gathers my stuff and says we're going home. I feel guilty, but I don't understand why. I feel mad about feeling guilty. Eventually, we get home. The walk back felt like it was forever. My parents tell me that it's okay to have imaginary friends. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I break and shout out that Becca is not imaginary. They ask me who she is. I break and tell them the whole thing. They're visibly concerned. They patiently explain that she can't be real because there's not another house for 15 miles. I get mad. I storm back into the woods. I shout her name over and over again. There's no answer. I cry. I go home completely broken, heartbroken. Everything just feels awful. I go back the next day. I bring a comic with me. I sit under a beechnut, reading it out loud, very out loud. I catch a shadow in the tree above me. I look up. It's a black cat with her green eyes. Becca still lives in those woods. She always will.
So there's this abandoned oil rig in the woods right down the road from my house. My buddy David showed it to me when we were in high school. We used to go there with a few other dudes to smoke weed without having to worry about being caught. He said it was part of his dad's property, and that he used to play back there all the time when he was a kid, and that it was perfectly safe. David was also a compulsive liar, and would lie about the stupidest shit just to see if he could get away with it. Anyway, he told me and my two buddies, Chris and Kyle, that we could use it whenever we wanted. And fast forward a handful of years, the story takes place in 2011 when my buddies and I are in college. We don't really talk to David anymore. In fact, we're pretty sure that he moved out of the state, but we haven't spoken to him in so long, and that we weren't sure. Either way, we continue to use his little oil rig spot because at this point, it's just a peaceful, comfortable, and quiet place to chill for a couple of hours and just shoot the shit. Chris was usually the one driving, and I was always shotgun. It was getting pretty late on this particular evening. We usually leave before it gets dark because the woods in this area get creepy as hell. But we had all been drinking for a while, and Chris wanted to wait it out for another 30 or 40 minutes before we drove anywhere, just to make sure that he was sober. We all decided to step outside of his car for a cigarette, and this is when shit started getting weird. We were all talking about one of Kyle's past girlfriends and teasing him because she was nasty, and then we heard this sound. We all heard it, but at this point, we couldn't really tell you even what it sounded like because we were all laughing when we heard it. It was just loud enough for us to barely hear it. Kyle must have heard it better than Chris because as soon as it registered, he had tossed his cigarette and noped back into the car. Chris and I just stood staring off into the woods to see if we could hear it a little better. Unfortunately, we did. So this sound, this awful sound, it sounded like a small or medium-sized dog at first. For a split second, it was actually kind of comforting. I think that Chris and I were both worried that we might be about to learn the hard way that David was full of shit about this being his dad's property. The comforting feeling didn't last very long though. The howling quickly went from a howling sound to a growling sound, and then the growling sound to this horrible, deep, gurgling sound. It wasn't something that any native animal could make under any normal circumstances. It sounded kind of like a koala growl, only a bit wetter, if that makes sense. I still don't know what the sound was, but I'm 90% sure that either monsters were real or I just heard an animal get murdered. Either way, I got back in the car. Chris, of course, didn't think anything of it. He laughed at us and teased us from outside the car, making your standard generic boogeyman jokes. He tells us that it was likely David being a dick and trying to scare us, and that we were just mistaken about him moving away. Chris is the kind of person who thinks he's a little smarter than he actually is. I don't know if it's because he wanted to prove to us that it wasn't a monster, or if he's just an idiot, but he went off to look for the source of the sound. I tried to reason with him, saying that it might not have been anything paranormal, but it could have very well been like a psycho or a pissed off animal or something, but he went off anyways. So Chris had been gone for about 5 minutes before Kyle and I began to get worried. 5 minutes isn't a long time, but he should have been back by then. He could have gone up to David's house, knocked on his door, and wrestled David back down to the car in that amount of time. After about 10 minutes of texting and calling with no response, we decided that we're going to go look for him. We both get out of the car, and sure enough, there's Chris, just kind of standing there beside the oil rig itself. It was dark, so I guess we just didn't notice him while we were in the car. Kyle and I are feeling mixed emotions. We're glad to see him,
but we're pissed that he was gone for so long. We bombard him with questions, like what happened, what did he find, what took him so long, etc. Most of our questions were met with shrugs or stares, although we were able to get him to answer a few questions, but they didn't say much. He just told us that he got lost and didn't hear his phone. We thought, whatever. At this point, all Kyle and I wanted to do was go home. But Chris wanted to keep looking around the woods, and he was trying to get me to go with him. I assumed because he knew that I'm used to navigating the woods. We stood around for ages, arguing and begging him to take us back home, and the more we talk, the more uncomfortable that Kyle and I are getting. There's something not right about Chris. He's usually an incredibly predictable person, but right now he's different. He's talking differently, like the tone of his voice is scratchier than usual, and the things he is saying are downright strange. He's coming up with the weirdest imaginable reasons as to why we should go in the woods. Things like asking us if we needed to use the restroom, or if we want to see a dead animal, or something stupid that he found in the woods. It was at this point that I decided that I'm just going to walk home, and I texted Kyle about how Chris was being weird as hell, and that we needed to ditch him and go back to my place. He agreed. So we agreed to follow him into the woods, and we just lagged behind him as much as possible. The woods were pretty thick and were almost pitch black, so it wasn't difficult to lose him and get back out onto the main road. Halfway during the walk back to my house, Chris calls me and asks where the hell we went. I told him he was being creepy as hell, so we left. Needless to say, he had no idea what we were talking about. He said that he came back to his car and we were just gone, and that's about it. He dropped by my place and we continued drinking there. We argued for like 10 minutes. He insisted that we elaborated on how he was being creepy. We gave him examples, and he said, "You guys are full of shit. You're just trying to scare me. It's not going to work. That didn't happen." We eventually just had to drop it because he was starting to get legitimately pissed because he thought that it was a joke and that the joke had been going on for way too long. We still go back there every now and then, and we'll hear that noise whenever we go for a smoke, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Sometimes I even hear it when I'm at my house. It doesn't scare me enough not to finish my cigarette, but it's enough for me to keep my front door cracked while I stand out on the porch, just in case I have to get back inside quickly. As for the sound itself, I've heard it enough times that I'm almost positive that it's some kind of animal being killed, which eases my nerves, but I still can't really think of any real explanation. We don't have any real predator animals over here, not ones that would prey on dogs. Maybe it's a coyote fighting with something. If someone has a legitimate explanation, I would like to hear it. And if you're wondering where this was, it happened around September in 2011 in Ohio, a couple hours north of Akron. To start off, this happened a little over 10 years ago, and everything that I've written down was written down at that time, while it was still fresh in my mind. I've come across it again recently. It kind of made me relive the events in that entire night, but believe it or not, here goes. A little background on me. At the time this happened, I was 27 years old. I was pretty much raised as a woodsman and a hunter. My grandfather would take me out into the bush every chance that we got for hunting, fishing, tracking, trapping, and general living off the land type stuff. Now my father, on the other hand, was more involved in emergency services, so I was also raised around incident command, medical first response, and all that blah blah boring stuff. Due to my upbringing,
I naturally ended up becoming a dedicated volunteer with the local ground search and rescue unit when I turned 18. After only a year, I was made a team captain or instructor. Between this and my former job, I've seen murder, suicide, and accident victims that end up in all states of pieces, I guess is the word, rot and decay over the years. You get pretty tough skin when having to deal with all that. I thought that I could handle anything, but I was wrong. Of course, names have been changed, and the area will not be mentioned due to some confidential info, and I don't want the real names getting out. I'll just say that we were in northeast of North America. Around 1 a.m. on a Thursday morning, we had a call out for a missing native hunter who didn't return home after leaving to drop a few bags of apples off at his deer blind. We get calls like this a lot. Most times the person ended up getting their deer and just ended up staying the night to pack it in the morning. Or worse, sometimes they slipped and fell. Or in one case, one had a heart attack while dragging the heavy apple bags. But most times, everything ends up fine. It ends up being a bit of a misunderstanding and everyone goes home happy. We all meet up at the local mall and hop in our transport bus as the location is about a 3-hour drive away. We get there at roughly 6 a.m., and while most people are helping to set up the mobile command post, my team, I lead the main hasty team, we go in first, is getting the lowdown on the situation before heading into the bush. The man is about 40 years old. He has a .303 rifle and has been hunting in this area for most of his life. I think that it's pretty strange. Usually local natives are great in the woods for navigation, and 40 is a little young for a heart attack, but I've seen it happen. My team of 5 started to head in where the man's truck was parked on the side of an old logging road. There's me, Jen, Sean, Stephen, and Kyle. We all have wilderness backgrounds, and we were selected for the hasty team because we have proved ourselves time and time again to be one of the elite ones in our ragtag team of volunteers. Each one of us carries basic survival gear, an advanced medkit, and electronic and old-school navigation tools. The hunter's family and friends had provided us with the exact UTM coordinates for his deer blind, so we were going to head straight there first. It was roughly noon now, and by the looks of the GPS, we were almost at the deer blind. We are in a line search formation, each one spread roughly 10 feet apart, and suddenly, we hear a scream. It sounds like a woman being stabbed in a slasher flick. The 2 searchers on either side of me instantly break the line and come straight to me. I reach for my radio to call in what we heard, but it's all feedback. It's not working. A brand new fancy $1,400 real-time tracking radio, and they still aren't worth a shit. I had to make a decision, and I tell the others to come on, and we start pounding ground fast in the direction of the sound and the deer blind. In about 10 minutes, I see the camouflage netting strung up around the trees. We found the blind. We get closer. The first thing I see is 2 large male foxes tearing up an old Alice frame style rucksack. Instantly, I recognize the screaming sound. Anyone who knows the woods knows what the fox actually says, and it isn't that comforting. Once we get closer, the critters realize that we are there and they take off like 2 bullets. I tell my teammates to stand back while I check out the area. Since the pack is there, I kind of figured that our hunter may be deceased in the blind. The first thing I notice, besides the torn up pack, is 2 large burlap sacks, still full on the ground by the blind. The blind itself also seemed to be in horrible shape, all torn up. Leaves were kicked up, boot prints were in circles all around the spot, and I counted 16 empty .303 cartridges on the ground, only they were scattered, like someone was running in circles and shooting in all directions. The hunter is not in the blind.
I'm starting to get confused. Extremely confused. None of this adds up. I try my radio again, and still, static. I dig out my cell phone, and of course, there is no signal. I back away slowly the way that I came. We were trained to preserve a scene like this in case it turns into a crime investigation. Police don't really like it when we mess things up too much. And when I got back to my teammates, I explained the situation, and I asked if any of them has a cell signal, as we need to inform command and police of the situation. But nothing works. I immediately take out my trusty notepad. I jot down everything that I observed. I then take out the GPS and try to take a bearing with my compass, as do the other four. We are going to get the hell out of Dodge right now. Something is wrong. I don't tell them that, but after I give them the info, I could tell that we were all thinking it. It's now about 2, and we were going pretty fast. Jen asks to stop for a minute to check our bearing, and I agree. I check, and sure enough, I'm on course. But everyone else tells me I'm wrong. We start to compare, and it turns out that everyone's GPS is giving different info. I think perfect, just what we need. I break out the map and take a peek. Triangulation is almost impossible because of the thick, tall, boreal-type forest that we are in. I try to get a basic idea from the contour lines on the map as we are going slightly uphill. According to the map, we should be going downhill back toward the road. Getting turned around like this isn't something that I or the rest of the team have been known to do. I chalk it up to the stress of the situation and the stress that our minds are under. I tell everyone to stop. We need to rest for a while, eat, rehydrate, and try to gather ourselves up. Once we are fed, military rations do nothing for morale, and to have had plenty of water, we decide to make a game plan. Everyone is looking at the map and compass. A few moments go by, and we all compare notes on what the game plan is. The GPS units still aren't getting a proper satellite feed. The radio is still nothing but static. Again, everyone has different ideas. What the hell? Everyone rechecks their work, and Kyle says that we need to go north and points. Jen instantly agrees, except north is the other way. I look at my compass, and north is in yet another different direction. We all take our compasses off our lanyards and put them on the ground a few feet from each other and look. All 5 compasses are pointing in different directions. I don't know what to say or do or think at this point. Finally, I man up and say it. We're lost. That's right, search and rescue is lost. I've seen GPS fail many times, radios too, but my compass is my failsafe. The only time they go wonky is when there's a large metal source nearby. Now something really isn't right. The first rule when lost, stay where you are. They will either come looking for us, which is embarrassing, or we will hear teams passing by. We couldn't have gotten that far off track. I pull out my pen flare anyway and fire 3 red flares into the air. Then one of us has a go at blasting our Fox 40 whistles. Fast forward a few hours, 10 more flares, and so many whistle blasts that our ears hurt. The sun is going down, and it is cloudy as all hell. The temperature has already gone down to 5 degrees Celsius, and it was calling for rain tonight. For all of us, it was search mode off and survival mode on. I tell the team that it's time to build shelters and get prepared for a long and shitty, cold night. By the time we have 2 decent lean-tos made up and a fire between them, it's dark. We all have our canteen cups propped to the side of the hot coals to make some hot drinks with. We talk and chat and try to joke around for a few hours when we decide that it's time to try and sleep. It already had started raining, and it was getting damp and chilly. Myself and Jen are under one lean-to,
Stephen, Sean, and Kyle are under one to the opposite from us. We decide to have a fire watch to keep it burning and listen for any of the other teams that may be close. Our organization searches in the dark and shitty weather, unlike a lot of other ones. After an hour, the person awake was supposed to wake the next, so on and so forth until morning. I took the first watch. First is always better, you get to sleep longer. Kyle moved over to our lean-to. He and Jen laid toe to toe. I was barely covered by what was left of the shelter, getting wetter and colder by the minute. I decided to get off my ass and move around a little. The rain was slowing down, and besides, we needed more firewood. From here, things begin to go very wrong. I'm about 15 or 20 feet away from the lean-tos. I'm breaking dead lower branches off a black spruce. Then I hear a crash and a whole lot of screaming and cursing. After running back, all I can see is 2 torn down shelters and my 4 searchers crawling out from under them. What the F? I asked, knowing full well our shelters were great. They were constructed very well. We're trained to build them extremely sturdy. Jen is screaming and crying, saying someone was here. Someone was here. Kyle asked where the hell I was, and I explained that I was getting more firewood, hence fire watch. Jen was hysterical, the kind of hysterical where you can't get a straight answer out of them. After calming her down, we got the full story. She had woken up, suddenly. She had a sick feeling in her stomach, and then heard something. Footsteps. She thought that it was me walking around, when then she heard a loud crack. She rolled over and looked, and in the firelight, she said was the shape of an extremely large person pushing down on the main cross poles of the lean-tos, and in an instant, the whole shelter was on top of her. Instantly, I go into rage mode. I tell them to gather their gear. It was probably some inbred redneck out here screwing with us. After we packed, I searched the area. No footprints, not even broken ferns, nothing. Whoever it was one stealthy person. Stephen keeps saying that we need to stay put. Our navigation and radio is still on the screwed up side. At that point, I didn't care. I assign everyone a number and tell them that whenever I holler out 1, they are to holler out their number in succession. We are going to spread out into a line and walk. My reasoning being, if we are a single file, we can miss an old ATV trail or something. We all flip our headlamps, maglights in hand, and start walking. After 100 paces, I holler, 1. 2 comes from my left, Jen. 3 comes from my farther left, Kyle. 4, still left, from Sean. 5, left, Stephen. And then, from my right, comes 4. But it didn't sound human. It was like a sick moose trying to talk with its throat cut. A gurgling, disgusting sound. Deep, yet rung with a high pitch to it. I don't even remember thinking. Instantly, my maglite and headlamp were pointed in the direction of the voice. I don't know what the hell to really call it besides a voice. There was a person there. Tall, really tall, looking straight at me. He looked to be kind of native, only at least 7 feet tall. He had on a camo hunting jacket, but it was now 1,000 sizes too small. His arms were unnaturally low. His hands almost reached his knees, and then I noticed that one leg was at least a foot longer than the other one. I shone my light in his face, and I almost threw up. I can only describe it as the worst stroke victim I've ever seen. One side of his face looked fine. The other looked almost like it was melted. The right eye was 3 inches lower than the left one. The bottom lip hung below his chin. I'll admit it. I started screaming like a 10-year-old little girl. I fell down on my ass. That's how hard and loud I screamed. The thing's lip curled up the side of the face that was fine and extended almost to its ear in the most disgusting, unreal smile that I could imagine. I heard everyone running toward me. The thing dropped onto all fours and started running like a cheetah through the bush. The rest were with me now, asking me what the hell happened. Was I all right? I kept asking, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" None did, but they said they heard the voice trying to call number 4. Jen was chalk white again. Tears were running down her cheeks, and she just stared at me. I got up and hugged her hard, and she whispered in my ear, "I just want to go home." I loaded my pen flare with a bear banger, loud and explosive projectile for scaring large animals, and tried the radio again. Still nothing. I said, "Let's go. No more side by side. We stay within arm's reach of each other." We power hiked at full speed for what seemed like miles. The whole way, branches were cracking all around us. We heard something running in all directions. What is worse is every now and then we would hear 4 in that same disgusting voice over and over again. Each time we heard it, it almost sounded a little more human, a little more like Sean. I can't speak for the others, but I was on the verge of throwing up from being so scared. I've never felt fear like that. I didn't know it was possible to feel fear like that. After what felt like an eternity, the sun started coming up. The running sounds and breaking branches slowed down. We haven't heard the thing speak for almost an hour now. Sean stopped suddenly and said, "Did you hear that?" We all stopped and listened. It was a whistle. I blew back 3 times, and then the other whistle sounded off again, and I thought, thank God. All 5 of us raced toward the sound as fast as we could. I was still blowing my own whistle, as were the other 4 as we ran. We finally came upon a team of searchers. The leader, Dave, started asking us questions. Were we all right? What happened? We lost contact with you. The command post couldn't pick up on our tracking radio to see where we were. Dave's and my own radio suddenly came alive, scared the hell out of me. Team 4, we just picked up Team 1's signal. They are right on top of you. Are they with you? Dave responded that we were all right and that we were heading out. On the way, I checked my GPS, as did the rest of my team. The GPS was working now, the compass was working, and the radio was. Dave also informed me that they had found the hunter. Where at? I asked. He was at his deer blind. He was unconscious, but Team 3 managed to wake him, and he walked it with them. And I said, "What? No, we were there. He wasn't there." I explained the ripped pack, the empty cartridges all over the ground, and the half-torn down blind. My team agreed with me. They didn't see the blind, but after everything that happened, I think that they were just trying to fight off insanity. But Dave insisted that Team 3 said that the area was clear. It was only the hunter and his rifle. We got back, and I went for my debriefing with my search manager and the commanding officer with the police. I left out the whole monster in the woods thing, shelters getting knocked down, and all that stuff, but I made it very clear the state that the hunting spot was in. Apparently, Team 3 had taken pictures of the area, while the hunter was gathering his wits before they left. The leaves weren't kicked around. The blind looked like it had been remade. There were no empty cartridges on the ground. The apples were in one pile on the ground, and not in bags. They also kept insisting that the hunter did not have a pack, nor was a torn-up rucksack seen or even reported. Everything was still wrong. We were safe, but everything was wrong. I left the command post and walked over to the ambulance where the hunter was. I was going to ask him if he was okay, and about the empty cartridges all over the ground. I know what I saw.
When I rounded the corner of the ambulance, there he was. That's the person that I saw, only now he looked right. But that face, that jacket, I stood there, wide-eyed for a minute, when it opened its eyes, looked at me, and smiled. Something about it gave me an instant nope. I turned around, picked up my gear, went on the bus. My team and I sat together on the ride home. We never said a word the entire way. Days later, my search manager called me and told me that the hunter was all right physically, but after an evaluation at the hospital, he was put into psychiatric care as he just wasn't acting right. They figure it's shock from exposure to the elements, possible head trauma. I thought that this was BFing-S, and then I got thinking, did the search and rescue team take something out of the wilderness and put it into society where it doesn't belong? What happened to the hunter? I know that that person was not the hunter. I feel like I can never sleep properly again. I grew up in the woods, but now I'm terrified to even think about going back in there. The thought of getting called for another search is making me so anxious, it's making me sick. And that's everything that I wrote down from after it happened. Eventually, I did go on some minor search and rescue operations, but nothing happened. Everything turned out as it normally should. It's one of those things that I just try to forget. I live on the outskirts of a tiny mountain town in Kentucky. The main part of the town is at the base of our tinier mountain. One road swerves up the mountain. The houses are spaced every couple of 100 yards. At the top is a reservoir or a man-made lake that's stocked with plenty of fish. The river flows down the mountain from the reservoir, through town, and into a larger natural lake. My house is the second highest on the mountain. The river flows right through my backyard. My best friend, his nickname is Leroy, so that's what I'll call him here, lives up the road in the highest house. And during the time of this, we were fishing in the woods between our houses in May of that year. It was somewhere around midnight to 1 a.m. I was perched on a rock midstream with 2 or 3 lines at a time. It was a deep river. Leroy was sitting over in the branches of some trees, trying to get some carp to come out of the roots to bite. At some point during this time, we were jolted out of what we were doing by this crazy mad howling from deeper in the woods. It scares us so bad that Leroy nearly falls out of the tree that he's in. The howling is followed by a growling and snarling. It couldn't be more than a couple 100 yards from us, downstream. Leroy and I flash our lights at each other and stare at each other, listening for maybe 5 minutes. After silence, Leroy says, "Damn, that was one hungry bobcat." I laugh to break the fear, but I'm still scared shitless though. I continue fishing, but I'm still listening to what's going on around me now. About an hour later, we're packing up. I'm stuffing some carp and bass into a cooler. Leroy is trying to get out of the tree. The base of the tree that Leroy is in is on the other side of the river. He'd have to get out of it and then wade through the river to get to the other side where our houses and the roads are. But I can't see him. I just hear a struggling in the brush. I hear that howl again, closer, and I scream, "Andrew!" I rip the Bowie knife out of my tackle box and dash across the river to get him. He's bugging out on the other side of the river. The howling is crazy loud. I finally get across. I light our oil lantern and toss it into the bushes. The glass breaks and fire erupts from it. I catch some bushes on fire, but I don't care. I'm trying to find my friend. And then I see him. Leroy is backed against a tree. His nose is bleeding, and there are scrapes on his arm. Whatever it was is gone. I stomp out the fire, help him to his feet, and we try to get out of there. As we're running,
Leroy's just hollering. That wasn't no damn bobcat, and he just keeps repeating that. My house is closer, so we run onto my porch. I wake up my girlfriend and tell her to call the sheriff. Leroy's shirt is ripped up, so we tell him to take it off. The scratches and stuff are all up his chest. On his chest is a big red mark that's similar to a human's hand. It's as if he had been slapped crazy hard. You can even make out the individual fingers. At the end of where each finger would be is a long gash, as if this thing had claws. We gather our wits, try to calm down, and rationalize it as some kind of punk kid playing a really awful prank. But I'm worried that it's a psycho. There's a penitentiary 1 county over. We grab some guns and lanterns. The sheriff is taking way too long to get here. We left our cooler and fishing gear out in the woods anyways. Uncle Chokey, my neighbor, his name is not Uncle Chokey. He's also not my uncle. That's just what literally everybody in town calls him. He heard us hollering. He comes out with his gun and his lantern too. We get back to the river to find our gear. Leroy's is on the other side of the river still. The coolers are knocked over. There's fish flopping around on the ground. And we know that we didn't kick our coolers over. Several of the fish are missing. We had caught 9 or 10, but there were only 3 or 4 left flopping around on the ground. They were too far away from the river. They would have killed themselves before they flopped back into the water. So we helped them along and tossed the fish back into the water ourselves. We don't care at this point. There's plenty of fish in there. We'll fish another day. We wade back across the river. Uncle Chokey is losing his wits behind us. He's old, about mid to late 70s. He's mumbling under his breath. It's really unsettling. We get to where Leroy was attacked and find his gear. We check the mud. We see, of course, mine and his boot prints. And then something else. Bare footprints that looked like a human's foot. Leroy and I stop and look at each other. Both of us are pale as hell. Uncle Chokey starts yelling into the woods. Hey you punks, get out here for I feel ya. Ain't no time to be slumping around the woods. There's no howling. Nothing. We head downstream to where we first heard the howling. The mud turns to grass and brush. We lose the tracks. We find some bushes near where it happened. And we find something we didn't expect. A mutilated deer was lying on the ground. Its front legs were gone. Its chest was ripped open. There was tears all in its skin. Leroy and I heave and puke. This is the worst thing we've ever seen. Uncle Chokey hollers, damn, the thing is still alive. And sure enough, the poor doe is still blinking. The pupils are dilated more than anything I've ever seen, as if there weren't anything but pupil. The smell of innards is overwhelming. Leroy and I are still dry heaving at this point. Uncle Chokey puts it out of its misery with his 30-06. The rifle blast echoes through the whole mountain, and then we hear it again, the howling, but it's really far off. Uncle Chokey's hollering again. Don't let me catch you boys. This ain't right. Y'all can get jail time for this. It's cruel. While Chokey's hollering, I elbow Leroy and shine my lantern in front of us. While we're following these new set of footprints, the sheriff catches up with us, Sheriff Lorge. We end up following the new footprints into the woods. The prints are going the other way now, toward the bushes. Really, what we're doing is we're heading towards where this thing came from, not to where it headed. But then again, maybe it walked in a circle. We haven't heard the howling since Uncle Chokey shot. Sheriff Lorge thinks it might be a good idea to shoot again. Uncle Chokey ends up shooting at a birch branch that's a bit off from our footprint path. The thing howls from a couple yards behind us. All of us lose our shit.
I throw my other lantern into the bushes like last time. A fire breaks out. All of us catch a glimpse of a pale, completely hairless man dashing through the woods away from us. All of us but Lorch fire in his direction. The howling gets farther and farther away. Lorch is freaking out. Don't shoot, don't shoot. Leroy, Chokey, and I unload our rifles and shotguns. All four of us look at each other in our lantern light, scared shitless. Everyone reloads. We walk back out of the woods, pick up our stuff, and go home for the night. The next day, all three of the sheriffs, me, Leroy, Chokey, and some other folks head back into the woods. The deer's gone. We find the tree that Chokey shot at, and in the daylight, we notice that a tree where we had all stood and shot wildly at the thing was all scratched and cut up. What we're looking at is obviously not deer rubbings. These are deep slashes. We find these on nearly all of the trees behind the tree that Chokey had shot. The thing had been following us. We head through the brush and search in the direction that the thing had ran. We find some bullet holes in the trees where we shot after it. In the brush and grass, we find what looks like a pig run, which is grass and brush pushed away to the side, sort of like a path, and there's blood in it. We had either hit it, or this is the way to drag the deer. We followed the pig run, single file, Leroy in front, followed by me, the deputy sheriff, which was some 19-year-old kid, Chokey, another deputy, and finally Sheriff Lorch. All of us have rifles loaded and ready. The pig run leads all the way to the edge of the woods. At the end is the edge of the mountain. It drops almost immediately at 90 degrees. There's endless valleys of trees. Nobody lives there. Nobody goes there. Nobody even owns this land. The only people who head back there are hunters who want a deep woods experience or moonshiners. It's too far down to see if the thing is down there. We decide that there's not a whole lot more we can do, and we're all freaked out. We kind of nope out of the woods after this. Sheriff calls the search off. The only way for the thing to get back up the mountain and into our woods is through the town. Leroy and I struck it off, still scared shitless. Chokey is in the bar in town, always telling stories to traveling hikers of the psycho in the woods and to never cross the river. Nobody crosses the river anymore at all, even people who live in the town. Leroy and I still fish in that same place, but sometimes you can still hear the howling really far off. We never hear it coming from our side of the river though. Leroy's scratches were treated at the hospital a few counties over as animal wounds. We aren't the only people in town that have sighted it, but the only people who've been attacked by it are us. Even some of the hikers come back to town talking about some creepy guy staring at them from the other side of the river. It's always when it's just coming on dark, and it's always the same description. A pale, naked person, with no real distinguishable features. I never saw its face, not in the daylight, but Leroy saw it up and close, and he said that he couldn't see any eyes. The only thing close to what we saw is I was digging around some local mythology, I guess is the best word, and we found some stories about the Pale Man. But those stories are really old. I'm never going out there looking for that thing again though. Leroy still has faint scars on his chest from where it gouged him. We still fish at the same spot like I said, but again, you don't cross the river, and we always bring our guns. Come to think of it, I haven't gone back really in the woods at all without something that can go boom. Every now and then, Chokey still pokes fun at us for getting sick over that deer. For real, that may have been the worst part. I've hunted, killed, and skinned and cleaned deer plenty of times before, but I've never seen one so mutilated in my life. And this thing didn't smell like any other dead deer. The smell was
absolutely rotten. It may have been a coincidence because it had been out for several hours dying, but it still reeked. And Uncle Chokey is one funny old coot. We have hikers frequently that come off the Appalachian Trail into town to sleep and chill at the bar, and he tells every one of them, "Don't you cross that river, boy. There's a psycho that lives in that part of the woods. You get any trouble from him, you go knocking on one of the last 2 houses on that road. They know how to take care of him." But yeah, if somebody ever came to my door saying that the psycho was after him, I'd probably tell them to F off back to town and not lure it to my house. I sure hope that we never see it again. Leroy and I still have a tree stand over on that side of the woods, and we've never gone back for it, even in broad daylight. I'm still too scared to cross that river. Some guys from town, moonshiners, say that they head over there all the time to their shack, and they never seen anybody. They think that Chokey is a loon. But they have admitted to seeing slashes in the trees and pig runs, though, and we don't have any hogs that high in the mountains. Maybe one day we'll get a group of 20 or so guys together, and maybe then I'll feel safe enough to go get my tree stand. So I'll be the first to say that all of this could have happened inside of my head. The mind is a freaky thing that can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. So here we go. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me that in life, you should not be scared of ghosts. Fear the living because they can actually hurt you. And in my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father, unfortunately, ended his own life, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set out to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer, and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things that were going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed up in my dad's car that he had willed to me to the cabin. Now this was our family cabin that my parents rented throughout the year when we were not using it. I had the keys to the cabin, and I also had the code for the alarms, so I did not feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them of my stay. This has nothing to do with the coming story, but I felt the need to mention it anyways. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in, aside from the occasional outing to hit the slopes. With my dog as company, DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content, and I started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent in either the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms, and I always kept the doors leading to them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creep me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he has also since passed. I was playing games and watching DVDs. That day was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car, and I decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours. maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins, aside from these two, were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Tall. This is important later on. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. So that's enough background. I'm going to jump to the weirdness. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like the footprints in the snow. They were all around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had just been out there in the last 20 or 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me, and maybe I just didn't notice. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Whatever. The prints led away from my cabin, and they disappeared in the snow toward the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints. I went back inside. Nighttime eventually came around, and I decided to head to bed. My dog, Midnight, was laying in the bed with me, when suddenly I noticed his ears perk up to a standstill, listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent. I was kind of freaked out, not gonna lie. I could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. My thought was, shit, well, fine. I couldn't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up toward the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted to, he sat himself down and stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright. I thought that maybe there were some forest animals out there that he wanted to chase down, but I did not want to chance anything, so I pulled him back inside, and we both headed back upstairs. Around a half an hour later, I was laying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps. I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof. Maybe a kind-hearted forest animal was running around. But there's one thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart, like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting for me to let him out. And I thought, alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and my shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and I went out onto the balcony. As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and I started canvassing the roof with my light. But there was nothing there. The snow on top was undisturbed. Weird. Maybe it was all in my head. But what about Midnight hearing the noises too? Maybe he was feeding off my fear or paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. Now what's coming next is the part of all this that still makes me kind of shake and makes my heart beat hard just thinking about it or telling it to people. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. And that's when I saw it. It was in a tree that was a little taller than our cabin, and about 20 feet from the balcony. I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between the 2 branches. It was squatted, one on each branch. Its arms were extended above its head, holding on to the branch above it. I thought, F me, what is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing,
and I stood just staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and I pulled Midnight in with me. Once outside, I locked the door, shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and I retreated back to bed. But later on in the night, I heard tapping on the screen door, like somebody was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent, and it didn't stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not to do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed there where I was. Eventually, I passed out and woke up in the morning and everything was normal. The rest of the week that I spent there was non-eventful and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. I totally admit it could have been all in my head. A lot of stuff was going on at the time, and I was really screwed up from all the drama. But, yeah, that's my story. This is something crazy that happened when I was 16, living in the Pacific Northwest. I was living in a small town. There was nothing to do as a teen but find ways to get into trouble. You know how it is. Lots of trying to get laid. Lots of underage drinking, all that kind of stuff. So, there was a really cute girl that lived across a 40-acre field from me. Her mom was a single parent that worked night shifts. I thought this was perfect. So me and my friend, I called him T, decided that we should bring over a couple 30-packs of Busch Light because we were broken, dumb teenagers. So a few hours into the night, everyone's having a great time. I step out onto the porch to, do my business on the barbed wire fence. And then I hear something, movement, about 30 yards out in the darkness. I didn't think much of it at the time because there's cows there. And I thought cows plus fence equals makes sense to me. And then I see something else, something weird. It's a human-like figure that looked like it had a big hat on or something. Just standing there. I could only make out a silhouette at first. I yell out, "Hello? Who's that?" There's no reply. I wait a few seconds, and then I say, "Hello? I'm talking to you over there by the fence." The figure turns toward me. Its eyes are doing that yellow glow thing like a cat's eyes when you shine a light on them. I stop up and think, what? But I just turn around. I go back inside to resume drinking. I thought that it was really creepy, but not really scary at the time. I go back inside with my friends and this girl that I had invited over, the girl from before that I mentioned. I tell her, "Hey, your neighbor is kind of a weirdo, huh?" And she said, "Neighbor? Which one?" I said, "The guy that looks like a cowboy. He was sitting out there on the fence. I think he was watching me pee like a freak." She said, "What? Show me." So I proceeded to go outside and see if the guy was still out there. I turned on the porch lights. Immediately, I heard something different than before. Hooves, like a horse was running in a corral. But there's no horses around. This was very strange. I go over to the spot where I took a pee. There's no one there. I say, "Oh, he must have run off," and then I call him a creep. And then suddenly, I hear the girl yelp like a dog. The dark cowboy-like figure surprised her. He's standing on top of my friend's car, eyes still glowing yellow. We all are terrified.
We untactically book it back into her house. I ran so fast I almost left her behind, but we all make it inside safely and easily enough. I say, "Does your mom own a gun?" And she said, "I have that paintball gun that you gave me last month." I said, "No, I mean a real one. Do you have a real one?" And she said, "No, why would we have that?" At that point, I'm thinking, F my life. Everyone's scared. They don't want to go outside because that thing is out there. I call my twin brother. He lives right across the field in his own house. I explain everything to him. The guy thinks that I'm drunk, laughs at me, and hangs up the phone. I think, bro, after all this is over, I'm going to beat the hell out of you. I call him again. I tell him I'm serious and that I need him to grab a side-by-side 12 gauge with some shells and to come over to this house. I wait for what feels like an eternity. The drunk girls are freaking out. They're all saying they want to call the cops. I've been drinking, so has my friend. We do not want the cops involved because we're underage. And then I hear it, a shotgun blast, about 70 yards out, and then another, and very shortly thereafter, my brother comes barreling onto the front porch in full nope fashion. I say, "Bro, did you shoot that guy?" And he said, "What guy? This thing is the size of a moose. It just charged at me. You bastard, you didn't warn me that there was something other than cows out there." And I said, "What? Moose? What moose?" I decide that it's best to wait until this girl's mom gets home, because none of us are going back out there. At this point, everyone pretty much abandoned drinking. Everything got real serious and real quiet. My friend gets the idea to turn out the lights and thinks maybe it'll go away. I agree, and so does the girl. It's worth a shot. We turn off all the lights and sit silently in the living room, peering out of her windows like a bunch of scaredy cats. And then we hear something dragging near her trash cans, like it's brushing against her house. I ask her, "What the hell is it doing?" And someone else said, "I don't know. You tell me. You saw it last, didn't you?" I say, "BS. My brother saw it last." The girl speaks up again. "Guys, we should really just call the cops." But we all say no. We're all drunk and we're all underage. But one eternity later, probably an hour or two, her mom finally comes home. I've never been so relieved to have been caught at a girl's house trying to get with her. Her mom says, "Oh my God, T, what happened to your car?" We all think, what do you mean what happened to his car? There's an actual adult around now, so we all feel a little bit more courage wash over us. We go outside. This was not very bright in retrospect. His hood was completely smashed in. I mean, absolutely destroyed. It took us the better part of 30 minutes just to get the hood off so he could drive back home. I convince him to drop me and my brother off at our house because we are not walking through that field, especially since it's not light out. I hear the next weekday from the girl that in the mornings she went outside and the fence that I had took a pee on had been pulled over like when a cow jumps on it and drags it off. She had hoof marks all over her porch, but she claimed they weren't like a cow's. They looked really bizarre and weird. They were bigger. I wouldn't know personally because I didn't go over there for months and months. So I suck at telling stories and I'm not the best writer, but try to bear with me. This is a couple stories from my childhood. You can believe and discount whatever you want, I don't really care. But before I start, I have to give some context about my circumstances for some things to make sense. I was somewhere around 14 years old during this one. I was a dumbass and gullible, trusting kid. I didn't have very many friends because I had severe social anxiety from years of bullying. I lived in South Central America in a calm, middle-class neighborhood. My maternal grandparents lived way out in the middle of nowhere on a chicken farm. My paternal grandparents lived downtown in a weird section of older housing. Back in elementary school, I went to a magnet program in a similarly special academy in middle school because I was a bit of an artist and I had my theater dreams crushed there. Thanks, Mrs. Thompson. Oh, and thanks, Mrs. Lecomte. Those two destroyed any kind of motivation I had to do better, but my mom was semi-religious and took us to church every Sunday at this local place. I also had my Girl Scout meetings there. We eventually joined a different church after the troop leader moved back to Georgia, and the church that we settled at then is the church that I still go to this very day. I had amazing youth pastors there, but they eventually moved away as well, which made the church start to suck, and for a while my faith began to falter. So Daniel and Kevin, you guys were real bros. I had 2 dogs named Katie and Janie. Katie died of old age when I was around 6. Jane died of a brain tumor not a year later. I got a new dog, Doofy Doo, and then Milo a couple years later. Both of them are still with me today, and they're the light of my life. So now that you get the gist of my situation and my circumstances, this is what happened in this particular story. I was talking to some of my peers in the classroom about whatever we were talking about. I was struggling to look them in the eye. I was staring at the wall behind them instead. And then suddenly I see something. It's an old-looking guy in a gray-brown striped suit. And I think, what the hell is that? Where did he come from? He has these long, spindly fingers that are clasped together in front of his chest. His skin is a molted, ashy gray color with discolored spots all over his skin, like liver spots. His eyes are glassy and pure black, like some really screwed up doll. He's grinning at me with a mouth of far too many crooked and yellow teeth. He's making a soft clicking noise in the back of his throat. He's obviously bald, a top hat covering his greasy-looking, shiny head. His body was shriveled and twisted unnaturally, and he stood unevenly, his shoulders uneven, and his legs bowed. The worst thing about him, though, was his neck. It was gnarled and deformed, twisting around itself several times, like ivy growing around a pole. His head was situated on his neck crookedly, and he peered at me with these beady black eyes. I was scared shitless. I began to cry. My classmate is confused and gets the teacher. The teacher asks me, "What's wrong?" I try to explain what I saw, but I'm just blabbing about a gray, crooked man type thing, and pointing where he was. The teacher looked where I pointed. He was gone. I'd go on to see what I dubbed as the crooked man for a while longer, always behind other kids my age, making that clicking noise and making weird gestures with his hands that were similar to sign language. Nobody else ever seemed to see him other than me. Even though he never said or did anything inherently threatening, I always had this feeling of absolute paralyzing fear whenever I would see him behind someone. All he did was stand there and grin and gesture with his hands. He'd occasionally caress the neck of the person that he was behind, really gently, almost teasingly. It was so bizarre. I stopped seeing him after a visit to my paternal grandmother. I told her about the crooked man, and she was convinced that it was a demon that was following me. She told me not to look him in the eye and ignore him the best I can. I did. It sort of helped, but he only truly went away when I was given a rosary and a vial of holy water from the Vatican a while later after a second incident. So yeah, I have no clue what the hell that thing wanted from me, or what it even was. If anyone has any insight, let me know. I'm pretty sure that my Abula was right, and that he was a demon. But then, why didn't he try to hurt or kill me? This has puzzled me for years, and I haven't seen it since then. When I was 15, we were going to my nan's house through the back roads behind Abergele. My dad was driving, and if you want a picture as to what this place looks like, if you're American, think of rural Appalachia. There's no lights except the car lights, tight winding roads, high hedges, you know the type. Dad suddenly brakes, thinking he sees a rabbit, a fox, or a badger in the road, but it's just a bundle of rags, so he continues anyway and runs it over. We continue for another few minutes, and then the same bundle of rags is in the road ahead. This time, he drives past it. Minutes later, the same thing happens. My stomach sinks. Dad stops the car and gets out to look at it. As he opens the door, the car is filled with the strong metallic smell, but we don't find anything. He gets back in the car, starts the engine, and keeps driving. He notices that behind us, as though being pulled along by an invisible string, is that same bundle of rags. He stops the car again. Both of us are freaking out. Me more than him, obviously. I keep asking, "What is it, Dad? What is it, Dad?" over and over. He gets out to look and suddenly can't find it again. He's getting sort of sick of it now. I can see the annoyance in his eyes. He just drives on and on, ignoring whenever the bundle of rags shows up. I end up shutting my eyes the entire way there. Eventually, we finally get to my nan's house. Both of us are a bit shaken. Nan's a Jehovah's Witness, so is my granddad. They don't really do ghost stuff. We're all drinking tea, and Granddad tells us about the time that he saw something similar, a mysterious bundle of rags following him on the road when he used to drive up and down it on his motorbike in the evenings. And then Nan tells us the story that she remembers her older sister telling her once, about the body of a baby being found in a ditch on the side of the road, abandoned by an unknown mother, wrapped in rags. We collectively shiver when we realize we were being followed by the ghost of an abandoned baby wrapped in rags that just wanted to be close to someone. Another story. Anglesey has been spooky since even before the Romans came to Britain. It used to be the center of the Druidic religion. Before the Romans came and trashed the place, the whole island is covered in standing stones, and legend says that it's where the gate to Anwen, the underworld, is. I don't know about that, but it's a pretty spooky place. My parents go to Beaumaris to visit my Nan's elderly friend, and they leave me at Nan's. They stay at some B&B. It's an old farmer's cottage. There's an old couple who live there that are pretty nice. One of them used to be a professor in Bangor University. They all sit downstairs, having a bottle of wine. My mum hears someone walking around upstairs, and she asks, "Who's that?" The old couple, very matter-of-factly, say, "Oh, that's the ghost." The place used to be a vicarage, but they bought it when the church closed down in the 70s. The ghost was of a dead priest. He never harmed anyone. He just occasionally walked around the landing and stood at the top of the stairs, made some noise, but he had never been seen. My parents are a little spooked, but kind of thought that the old couple was just winding them up. But they finish their wine and go off to bed. Now the staircase to go to the first floor was one of those ones that has 2 steps going up and then turns left, following the wall upwards. Mom walks up the stairs, turns to go up the larger flight of stairs, and gets a terrible feeling that something's watching her from the darkness at the top of the stairs. She looks up slightly. She sees feet in the shadows at the top of the stairs, but doesn't dare look any higher. She's frozen in fear and shouts for my dad. Dad comes around the corner and sees her halfway up the stairs, frozen in fear, staring at the floor, and at the top of the stairs, he sees a man staring down right at my mom's head. He shouts something like, "Oi." The man literally disappears back into the shadows. Dad runs up the stairs. He's apparently very brave. Turns on the lights. There's no one there. Nobody sleeps that night, as you can imagine. And here's another one. I was 18 this time. My granddad had just died of complications from diabetes. Surprisingly, Grandma takes it very well. She's mad religious, so of course she will see him in the afterlife or heaven or whatever. My grandma's kitchen has one of those frosted glass windows which leads into a small hallway which links 3 bedrooms and steps up into the attic. I was over at hers with my parents trying to console her, which was difficult because she wasn't that upset. Dad sends me and my sister into the kitchen to make some tea for everyone. All the lights are off. We turn them on. The other side of the frosted glass window was pitch black, and out of nowhere, what looked like a man sort of hovered toward the glass, then hovered away again. I only saw it for about 3 seconds before it melted into the darkness of the hallway. I didn't bring it up to my Nan. Her husband just died the day before. Would have been a tad insensitive, don't you think? Me and my sister have talked about it. We both saw the same thing. She thinks that it was my granddad when he was much younger. We never spoke about it to anyone. And this next one isn't so personal, it's just a local legend. So I live on the North Welsh coast, which is like a thin strip of flat land which is dotted with towns, with the sea on one side and hills and mountains on the other. Up in the hills there's very little, some poor farms, cottages, woodland, swamp, and all that stuff. One of the woods that way is surrounded by swamp. It's got a slow-moving river going past it. Word on the street from a lot of people is that there are creatures living in the swampy area around it, and if you stay there too long, especially overnight, you will be attacked by them. So fast forward a little bit. I was in 6th form. A few of my friends decided to go camping there because we were teenage boys. I can't be arsed. I just done the Duke of Edinburgh award and I had enough of all that. So 3 of them go up to the mountains with tents, booze, and some rudimentary equipment. They stumble through the bog, get into the woods, set up their tents, and the sun goes down. The beer comes out, the fire is made, everyone is having a very good time. Later that night, my best friend, who I'll call Luke, is woken up by something rustling around with the empty tins and crisp packets. It's too deliberate to be the wind. He decided that he had to get out and see if it was a fox or a badger. He crawls out of the tent, has a little bit of a hangover. He sees a large figure moving toward the swamp. Luke wakes up his friend and tries to explain to him that some guy has been messing around the campsite, maybe a farmer or a policeman, and they should get going, not wanting any trouble. Everyone packs up quickly, mud on the embers of the fire, tins in a bag, etc. Luke wakes up his other friend, and they're chatting on the way out of the woods. His friend jokes, saying that he gets up to pee a lot, but he could hear someone walking in and out of the woods half the night. We have an inside joke that my friend constantly pees when he drinks. Don't know why, just we do. But this evening, my friend did not get out to pee all evening. At this point, they all realized that there was somebody indeed around their campsite. They kind of freak out. All of them start jogging, and they hit the bog, and since it's dark, they struggle to see where to place their feet. They fall down a lot and trip up in the dark. My friend falls, puts his foot deep into the bog, and while they're trying to pull him back out, a hand from within the bog grabs his ankle, and it won't let go. My friends pull and pull until he eventually slips out of whatever was grabbing him. When they finally pull him out, he has scratches all over his leg, nasty, deep ones. Every single one of them got infected. I saw them at school. For some reason, even though he had these cuts, nobody believed him, but I do, after I went up there,
It's a really spooky place. So like I said, I was doing the Duke of Edinburgh Award, and when I was doing this, it's sort of like an adventure trip. There's camping, hiking, and etc., all that stuff. But there's volunteering too. You get a certificate at the end. Lots of school kids in the UK do them. So I'm up way in the mountains of Snowdonia, hiking through the woods. There's 7 other people between 2 campsites. It's a 10-hour walk. We just had lunch, and we were rather energetic. And then suddenly, the light changes. It goes a weird kind of yellow, like you get just before a storm. That kind of color change. We think nothing of it. It's probably just a rainstorm on its way. It's pretty common in Wales. Slowly, all of us start hearing a noise, kind of like wasps. We keep walking, knowing that they wouldn't attack us if we just left. But for the next hour, we can hear this humming noise, like wasps. We thought that perhaps it was a bike or something, but the humming lasted way too long and was too regular. Eventually, we get to a road. The humming stops as if it was just cut off. The skies are blue now. Not spooky as much as it was just strange and weird. I read a book a few weeks later about Welsh legends in a secondhand bookshop. What we experienced closely matched the description of a creature called a Cernwyn in Welsh mythology. It lived in the woods, and I don't remember a lot of it, but I'm pretty sure it made people horny or something. It plays pipes that sound like bees and tries to draw you toward it. It was a chill up my spine when I read it. So my grandfather used to be a fisherman in Conwy. When I was about 3, my granddad and my dad were fishing a lot in the night. This is when the mackerel come out. They were coming around the Orm, a big headland named after Vikings. Ormurinn is a dragon in Old Norse, supposedly because it looks like a curled up dragon. I never saw it myself from above, but Vikings, My granddad and my dad were about 2 miles from the shore, and underneath the boat, they see cream-colored lights that just move around underneath of them. And this occurred the entire time that they were out there that night. They never found an explanation for it, or never found out what it was. It's not really super scary, it just kind of adds to the strangeness of the area. And I have one last one for you. It's the story of one of my aunts, and surprise, surprise, it's Aunt Anglesey. My aunt was about to get married. She rented out a cottage for her and her friends to get sloshed in. Typical hen night stuff. Everyone has a great time the first night. Everyone gets drunk. There's one room for 2 people, and about 8 people are there. My aunt shares a room with her best friend from school. Everyone passes out in their respective rooms from too much whiskey. My aunt wakes up in the night and sees a silhouette in front of the window. She thinks it's her friend, of course. She says something like, "Go to bed. It's 3 a.m. Then she rolls over to go back to sleep, but sees her friend lying in the bed. She screams and shouts. Her friend gets up, turns the light on. There's no one there. They stay up till the morning, nursing a horrific hangover. Everyone decides that it's just a drunken dream or something. My aunt goes back to bed around 11 a.m, falls asleep, nursing the hangover. But at about 12, she wakes up, hearing the door open. She mumbles something like, "Go away, I'm trying to sleep." And then, it feels as if someone sits at the end of the bed. You know that feeling where the end of the bed is pressed down? That. And then her friend walks through the door and asks if she was up. Then the bed springs back to normal. And that's pretty much all the stories I have. Almost everyone in my family has some kind of creepy story. They may not all be about creatures or anything like that, but North Wales was typically known as the land of the giants and ghosts in Welsh mythology, supposedly because of the Isle of Anglesey. We also had quite a few alien sightings, supposedly, but I have never seen or heard anything. Does anyone have any similar stories from their area?
So this is my first time ever talking about this. I have a story to share, and I don't know who else would possibly believe me. This is not one of those creepypastas either. This happened to me in August of 2017, but I've only really started to come to terms with it now, and I'm ready to talk about it, I think. And this isn't something that you can just talk to a therapist about. I'll try to get all the details together as much as I can, but again, this was a traumatic thing that I haven't gotten over, and it's the first time telling this story to anyone, and you're all strangers, so just try to bear with me if I get a little into the details or get long-winded. But basically, the other day I started reading about skinwalkers, or flesh gates, as some people call them, and I'm 99% sure now that I've encountered one of those things. They are real. I tried as hard as I can to push that memory to the back of my head and just repress it. But after stumbling upon the realization that there seemed to be a lot of stories that share similarities with mine, it's clear that I can't do that. So here it goes. A little bit of background to start off. I live in small town Nova Scotia, Canada, and I was always a bit of a troublemaker as a kid, but I've really smartened up in the past year or so due to the birth of my son. As of a couple of months after this happened, I actually became a person who prays and goes to church. I'm 25 now, and he was born when me and my girlfriend were only 17. My girlfriend Emma was raised on a farm and is pretty rugged and outdoorsy. My best friend Ben is a good kid. He's small and kind of androgynous looking. He's a weird guy that likes electronic music with no lyrics or something like that. He doesn't even drink or smoke weed because it gives him anxiety. We honestly don't have much in common, and I'm not really sure how we became friends. But I do know what holds our relationship together is a really strong understanding and acceptance of one another. We have the type of relationship where you share everything without asking, without judgment. Whenever I got into a fight with my parents and got kicked out, I needed a place to stay, and his door and arms were wide open. And then for the past couple of years, we've gone on a camping trip together in the summer. I would take him and our girlfriends to this secluded beach about 3 hours away. It's a half a kilometer stretch of sand in the middle of nowhere, basically. It's nestled between forested cliffside with nothing but huge rocks for miles on the other side. The access road isn't even paved. It's long and winding and bumpy, but it's gorgeous how the trees hang down in a sort of a tunnel around you. Like little country houses are dotting the landscapes as well. Some of them are quaint and pretty and well maintained, while others are dilapidated, abandoned old shacks. Eventually, you come to a bend where the houses stop, the woods get thicker, and the road steeps upward. Then, when you get to the top, there's a clearing, and you can see over the cliff to one of the most beautiful, scenic beaches you could ever imagine. It's actually enchanting to see. The beach itself is a public beach, so you aren't technically allowed to camp there, but it's just the kind of place where most of the locals are not really going to care. And even if they did, the cops aren't going to care enough to drive all the way out there at night to shoo away some teenagers off the beach, so we felt pretty comfortable. We had been there twice before, as I mentioned. Both times, a few small groups of people came and went throughout the day, but by nighttime, and then when we woke up in the morning, we had the whole beach to ourselves. This year, we upgraded to a much bigger, more luxurious tent because we were bringing my baby, and planned to set up his playpen inside the tent to substitute a crib. So again, at the time I was a proud new father and an owner of a 2008 Ford Escape SUV. The car is much more cramped this year due to the baby. It's me, my girlfriend, our son, Ben, and his girlfriend Jocelyn, and my 2 dogs, jammed in the back with all of our stuff. It's not really relevant yet, but it will be, so let me just tell you quickly about my dogs. They're 2 pit bulls, Nebraska and California. Nebraska I got when I was 10 and raised him from just a little puppy. Now he's a big lap dog. Callie is a guard dog. She can be a mean bitch when she wants to be, and that's why I love her. We adopted her when I was 14, and she was just about 8 months old then. Her previous owners had wanted a guard dog, but were having trouble reining her in, and the wife was concerned about her child's safety. Given that I didn't have one yet, I thought that the perfect time to train a badass protector dog was then. And by that point, she was already pretty deep into training, and seemed to take pretty well to me in Nebraska. When Emma got pregnant, I was worried that I might have to give her up too, because we didn't know how she'd react to a child in the house. But when he was born, the first day we brought him home, she just instantly fell so in love with that baby. She stopped sleeping at the foot of our bed with Nebraska that night and just started sleeping under his crib. I think she knows what her role in the family is, and is genuinely happy to be that for our son as her top priority. So, continue. I park at the end of the road, where it loops in a small circle, and we head down to the path to the beach. We were carrying as much as we could, but leaving plenty behind still. We set up our camp, where the sand turns into a patchy grass. This is about 50 to 100 feet in front of the tree line. Everyone has their assignments. Emma begins staking the tent. Ben starts making a fire pit. Jocelyn plays with the baby so he doesn't try to eat rocks, and I make a couple more trips back and forth to the car for the rest of our things. I trip in the sand and eat shit on the way back with the cooler, but luckily nobody seen me do that. So we all finish setting up, and we crack open a few cold ones. I drink with Emma, and intermittently I smoke a joint with Jocelyn for a few hours. The sun starts to go down. Ben starts the fire. Despite Emma being outdoorsy for our group, Ben is randomly pretty adept at managing a fire pit and building one. The beach is now completely empty except for our camp and a group of 20-somethings on the far side of the beach. They're also sitting around a campfire. They're progressively getting louder and rowdier. Eventually, my kid starts crying, so we put him to bed in our tent, and not too long after that, the group of other people starts to slowly clear off the beach. I go behind the tent to take a pee. It's about 11 p.m. by this point. Their fire is burning lower than ours, but you can still make out 3 silhouettes around it. They have no tent, but it looks like they're putting down sleeping bags in the sand. You can see pretty well in the dark here, because even though it had gotten kind of cloudy, the stars and moon are so bright and shine so brightly that they illuminate the clouds, which then reflects off the water and lights up the sand. I round the tent back to my seat, and I can see one of them gets up and begins the trek toward the path up off the beach. Most of his friends had already taken that path, but as he gets closer, it's clear that he's coming directly toward us. Nebraska, being the big dumb sook that she is, charges to close the distance between us and them. Luckily, this guy seemed to be at least somewhat familiar with dogs, because he didn't put up his guard to protect himself. He knew the huge pit bull bearing down on him wasn't going to attack. He pets my dog and continues into our campsite, smiling and waving, apparently drunk or something by himself. "Hey guys," he announced. "I figured I should come over and meet our neighbors for the night. How's it going?" Ben snaps a shh at him. He says there's a baby asleep in the tent, and he says, "Oh shit, sorry." "It's all good," I reply. I extend my hand to shake his. I'm more drunk than Emma, and more stoned than Jocelyn, so even though we come here specifically to avoid contact with other campers, I was feeling friendly. I told him my name. I point out my friends and introduce them, and he introduces himself as Ducky. He says that he and his friends are getting tired, but he's not, so he came over to meet us. He asks if we're from around here. I tell him kind of, but not really. He says that he just lives down at the base of the road we drove up on. He camps here all the time, ever since he was a little kid. And suddenly, my phone rings. The phone call was weird for a couple of reasons, but at the time, in my messed up head, they seemed to cancel each other out, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. For starters, there's no cell reception on that beach. Literally, as you drive up on the road to get here, you lose service. And then after that, it's almost like you step into some kind of electronic disabling force field or something. As soon as your feet hit the sand, you lose that last bar. Occasionally, it comes back for just a minute or so, and if you caught it right, you could check your Facebook or Twitter or whatever, but we don't come camping to watch our phone. So, surprised that anyone would be calling me, I answer, and this is when the whole night starts to get actually weird. I say hello, but there's nothing on the other end, just silence, followed by a short burst of static, and then my service cuts back out, and I lose the call. I assume at the time that I couldn't hear anything because there just wasn't enough reception, which makes perfect sense. But looking back now, I swear, in that burst of static, I think I heard a baby crying. I have no way to know for sure though, or if that's just me going crazy thinking about how screwed up this all gets. But again, at the time, the phone call didn't totally trigger any mental alarms. Oh, and also, after putting the baby to bed, every 20 or 25 minutes or so, Callie would start whining at the door, so we'd let her in, and then she'd just want back out again. So after she did that 3 times, we just left the bottom of the tent unzipped, so she could poke her head in and check on the baby, which seemed to satisfy her. But at this point in the night, after repocketing my phone, I hear Nebraska start growling. Nebraska doesn't growl at strangers. He doesn't growl at Callie. He doesn't growl, period, really, ever. I literally don't think I've heard him growl since he was a puppy. He's a total pussycat. He actually got quite a bit of size on Callie, but Callie picks on him relentlessly until he would climb up onto my lap. This was absolutely not like my dog to be aggressive like this. Now, I do start feeling like something is off, and that's when it hits me, that putrid smell. The air smells like fish normally there, which isn't super pleasant to begin with, but you do adjust quickly because it's so clear and fresh otherwise. This was like if the entire bay's supply of fish had suddenly all went belly up at the same time, and the unmistakable stench of death had just rolled in off the water, smacking us all in the face and continuing on its way up into the woods. Nebraska is inching away from our camp toward the woods, still growling. He's fixated on something at the tree line. It must be a deer or something. I hope it's not a bear. It's hard to make out through the brush, but I think I can see 2 little red lights, like the flashing of your phone when its battery is critical, but unblinking, watching. Nebraska then lets out what I can only describe as a war cry, because I've never heard him bark like that before, and then he darts off, running into the woods. Now I'm not so much creeped out by this, as I am annoyed as hell that I have to wander around in the woods, potentially all night, looking for my dog. But I do love him, and I have no intention of just leaving him behind, and I'm really worried and sad about the possibility of it coming to that. I yell out, "Nebraska," but he disappears from sight. I say, "Nebraska, get back here," but to no avail. He don't usually take off like that, does he? Dougie correctly assumed that we would not bring him here if he was a flight risk. I say, no, that's really unlike him. I was scanning around for Callie while we were focused on Nebraska. She had disappeared. Some guard dog, I thought. But it turns out she had just quietly slunk into the tent and was resting by the baby's playpen. I say, "Good girl, Callie. Stay." I toss her a graham cracker and zip the tent all the way up behind me. Dougie says that he has an old .22 hunting rifle in his trunk and offers to go get it to help me look for Nebraska in case we encounter critters. At this point, I remember that I have a handgun of my own in a car. It's one of those semi-automatic CO2 revolvers, one of those ones that's classified somewhere between an airsoft and a real pistol. It's definitely not lethal. You'd have to pretty much fire it at point blank at something's head. But of course, that's more than dangerous enough to drop the orange tip that you have on toy guns. What's more, It should be loaded with hunting pellets. I had bought the thing impulsively a couple years back and pretty much only ever used it to shoot cans with my ex. Then I stashed it under my seat in the car and forgot about it for 2 years. I was quite pleased with this revelation because it meant that I could take the hatchet into the woods and still leave the campsite with some form of weapon. I informed Dougie, hand him my car keys to retrieve it, trusting this stranger not to steal my car. After a few minutes, Dougie returns. He hands me my pistol and keys. The gun is dirty and, sticky from being neglected, but we have baby wipes. I clean it off and decide that we should probably make sure it still works. There are 8 pellets in a 10-round chamber. I think it could be worse. I have Emma watch what I'm doing as I remove the safety and cock the hammer. I aim at the woods and pull the trigger. It seems to work fine. As I realize that we're about to go off into the woods with weapons, I get this sense of dread. I hand Emma my gun. I go back into the tent and tell my son that I love them in case I die. The baby is fast asleep, but the dog is wide awake. I exit the tent, pick up the hatchet off the ground. Ben is holding the barbecue pitchfork nervously. He says he intends to use it as a weapon. I tell them, if anything starts coming out of those woods, don't try to be a hero. Send Callie to it. It could just be Nebraska coming back. And if it's not, well, she'll give you time to grab the baby and get away. If we're not back in 90 minutes, just go. I mean it. Take the baby and get the hell out of here. Emma is not happy about this idea. I give Jocelyn my keys anyways, and I assure her that I can always just pack our stuff up with Dougie and get a ride out of here with him later. So Dougie and I finally head into the woods. It's honestly nothing spooky for about an hour, but there's no sign of the dog. I'm disappointed that we couldn't find him, but part of me still hopes that he just may have made his way back while we were looking for him. He hadn't exactly been gone that long after all. We decide to head back before the others get worried and leave without me, because I was freaking out and told them to. So then we hear a rustle in the bushes. I call out, "Nebraska?" Dougie aims his gun, steady in the direction of the sound. And then there's another rustle in the bushes from the opposite direction. Dougie spins around again. I'm getting a little spooked now. I say, let's just go. And then there's another sound, way off in the distance, much deeper into the woods. It's a human baby crying. In fact, it sounds exactly like my baby. I'm frozen. You hear that? Dougie gulps. Yeah, I do. I'm very tempted to follow it. My mind races with thoughts of a bear or a pack of wolves ambushing our camp and hauling my son off into the night. But I don't think they would have gotten that far ahead of us without us hearing him cry before now, even if he survived such a thing. We turn around and just get out of there, but I am deeply disturbed. I need to get back now. I need to know that everything is okay. We break through the tree line, and there's Nebraska. He's sniffing around behind the tent like he's going to pee on it. Callie must still be inside. The others don't seem to have noticed that he came back. I say, "Hey, stupid dog, what the hell was that all about?" I'm so relieved that I forget all about the spooky baby crying. That, or I convinced myself that it was coming from one of the country houses, and I was just imagining that it sounded exactly like my kid or something. I don't know. But in that moment, I can tell you I didn't care. I was just happy to see Nebraska and the others all in one place. I sat down back in the sand, trying to relax. Jocelyn drifted in and out of sleep on Ben's lap, while he and Emma chatted with Dougie and Nebraska, just sat there, staring at the fire like an idiot. I take a puff off a joint, and then I remember the spooky baby crying, and I say, I think maybe we should just probably go home. Emma and Ben press me, but I don't give them a straight answer. I just keep saying I don't feel good anymore, and all that sketchy shit. I don't mention that I'm still kind of drunk, but honestly, I was just so uncomfortable that my own level of alertness was literally the least of my concerns. Sticking around to find out whatever the hell that was in the woods, that there was a real risk here. Ben knows me so well that I think he pieced together that something in the woods must have shook me, that I was serious, so he gave in and backed me up, eventually agreeing that we should go. I'm not quite spooked enough yet to just leave all of our stuff behind, so we start cleaning up. As soon as Emma opens the tent door, Callie lunges out of it. It was like she was a mountain lion or something. She actually pounced on Nebraska, knocking Emma aside like she didn't even see her in the way, and it was brutal. See, there are guard dogs, and then there are attack dogs. Guard dogs are protective, loyal, and disciplined. Attack dogs are barely contained, vicious. And what Callie did was a vicious attack. She went right for the jugular. I think she got it too, because he started spurting blood from his neck, and then there's a lot of yelping and snarling for like half a minute. Everyone is horrified, especially Emma. She screams and cries, retreats into the tent. The baby is waking up and joining her as he lets me know that he's okay, that Callie didn't hurt him. Not that it even occurred to me in the first place that she might have. At this point, I have no idea what the hell's going on, and I reach for my gun that Emma left on the ground. Nebraska's bleeding bad and frantically fending off Callie. They're rolling around in the sand, and it's just becoming stained red. For a second, he manages to get the upper hand and pushes her off, staggering them both. Callie almost knocks the tent over, but doesn't miss a beat. She jumps up and tackles Nebraska right into the fire. She leaps out from on top of him, almost gracefully, but doesn't stick the landing. It was probably for the best, though. Her underside had caught fire just a bit, and the thudding into the sand put it out quickly. This is the part of the story where shit changes to defy any rational explanation. Even now, I'm kind of shaking just writing it. This is when we realize that whatever this thing is not Nebraska. It becomes very apparent that this is clearly not my dog. It stands up on its hind legs, lets out this unholy effing screeching. It's a wail that I swear was so loud you could have heard it all the way across the bay in New Brunswick. It's engulfed in flames, and its back is turned to us, so it's facing Callie, but I can tell that its shoulders have also been pulled back almost into a more human-like position. And then there's 2 gunshots. Between that thing screaming and now Dougie popping off gunshots 2 feet away from my head, my ears are ringing now, and I can't tell if it's screaming or what, but I saw its head cocked to the side when the bullet connected. I don't know how many more shots he fired, but I closed my eyes and emptied my clip as well, save 1 pellet, into that thing. And when I opened my eyes, it was running back into the woods on its hind legs, still very much on fire. We were all expecting the foliage to start going up in flames as well, but the light quickly disappeared into the darkness. I see all the commotion woke up Dougie's buddies, and they're running toward us. "You should get out of here. We won't be far behind," he said as he jogged over to meet them. I tell everyone to grab whatever they can fit in their hands. We can always get another cooler and a tent, but we're going to get the entire F out of here right now. I say this loudly, partly because I'm trying to take charge, and mostly because I'm half deafened. We made our way up the path to the car, and there's Nebraska again. Emma had regained her composure by now, because she never actually saw the worst of it, but I could tell this upset her, that she was trying very hard not to break down again. He's crying and desperately scratching at the door, like I have been teasing him with, "You want to go for a car ride?" for an hour or more, and he just couldn't take the anticipation anymore. I dropped my shit and pulled out my gun. There's only 1 pellet left, and after what I just saw, I'm 100% ready to decapitate my dog the second he looks at me funny. But the thing is, he doesn't. I call his name and he looks at me. I don't want to say that everything felt right,
because so much was already incomprehensibly wrong. But when he looked at me, he didn't look at me wrong. He looked at me with those big, dumb, beady pit bull eyes, and I knew that this time it was actually my dog. And right on cue, as if to confirm it, Callie walked up to him and licked behind his ear, like she always does after she's hurt him and he doesn't want to play anymore. Upon closer inspection, he has a gnarly scar over his eye, and his entire right side is just scratched and ripped to shreds. I think, well, it's nothing that stitches and antibiotics won't fix, but it looks like he was hurt really badly. Still, he doesn't seem overly bothered by it, just happy to see us and eager to get into the car. And I think, me too, buddy. I let the dogs in the back, I strap the baby in, and we peel out of there, breathing a collective sigh of relief. And then, in the rearview mirror, some large creature is trailing us. It's running like an upright gorilla, with its hands still on the ground, as if it's pacing itself to keep a certain distance. All that dread comes back, and then it's just gone. But that doesn't make me feel any better at all, because all the trees around us are shaking violently, sometimes even slightly ahead of us, but sticking to either side of the road, like it was actually leaping over the car from tree to tree without ever actually appearing in sight. I'm pretty much sober at this point, and doing 90 on a road you really shouldn't go for 30 on. Everyone's crying. We clear the dense part of the woods and get to the part where there are houses, and the thing starts to back off. Not all at once, but shortly thereafter. The rustling stopped and the air just felt less tense. We seemed to have lost the thing. We hit the end of the street and make a left turn onto the main road, back towards the highway home. There's someone just standing in the middle of the road. My headlights shine right into his eyes, but he doesn't blink. He just stood there with this absolutely nightmare-fueled twisted smile that I'll never forget. It looks like Dougie. Of course it is. And now we're playing chicken. There's no possible way that he could have gotten so far ahead of us without passing us in his own car. Basically, I'm fresh out of Nope, and I make an executive decision. I put the pedal to the metal. Emma says, "Oh God, no, what the F?" I hit this unholy entity with my car and don't look back, but Ben does. He stops and pauses. He says there's nothing there. It's like it just disappeared. But I'm definitely worried that this thing is hanging on underneath the car, but I keep that to myself. I feel like that everybody's thinking it too anyways. I just keep driving. We make it to the highway, and about 40 minutes out, we see a well-lit parking lot just off of an exit ramp. It's a truck stop and a McDonald's. Both of them are open 24 hours. I clutch my gun and open the door, half expecting to be instantly dragged through the pavement and directly to hell, but it's clear. Cautiously, I crouch down, verified that there was in fact no one, no monster, underneath the car. I'm fairly certain now that we are finally safe. We're all shaking, so I took the last of the weed that we were saving for some other time, and I passed it around. I also let the dogs out to check over them as well. I could tell they've had a long night too. And I noticed that Nebraska is limping. Kind of bad, actually. So getting him medical attention is bumped up on our priority list. I asked the guy working the gas station, and he says that there is an emergency animal hospital just a couple towns over that deals mostly with cattle, but could take a look at him. We hit McDonald's before getting back on the highway, and of course, just to top everything off that we have been through, their ice cream machine was broken. Anyway, the vet stitches Nebraska up, gives him some painkillers and antibiotics, but his leg is broken, and we get told that we'd be better off getting him taken care of at our actual vet. We finally make it home. The sun is up. We don't even bother trying to sleep. We wait a couple hours for our local vet to open up. She puts his leg in a cast, but also tells us that he's now blind in his right eye, and that's pretty much the end of this. Sorry it's a little anticlimactic, but it's all true. So that was pretty crazy, wasn't it? If you liked the video, then be sure to like and subscribe, and hit the notification bell and all that good stuff. And if I had to take a wild shot in the dark as to where this took place, it mentioned the bay, and it mentioned this secluded beach, so I'd have to guess Sandy Cove, or somewhere maybe around the Bay of Fundy, but I could be wrong. That's just a shot in the dark. But I hope you did enjoy the video, and I hope you enjoyed this crazy encounter from Nova Scotia. If you have a story of your own, I have an email in the description below that you can send it to if you'd like to. Down there as well is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way. And of course, super thanks here on YouTube. And with that, I thank you for pulling up a stump with me. Remember to follow the 3 H's of the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. So to start off, here's some background. I'm Polish, and I've been into the creepy and paranormal stuff for all of my life. Me and my parents spent a lot of time at my grandparents' place. We've been there practically every free time for half of my life. I've seen lots of weird stuff there, and in my hometown. The first story here is not mine, but it's one that my grandma told me. So over 60 years ago, when my grandmother was young, she would walk through her village down to her house. On the way, she sees some weird green lights in the swamp. She shrugs it off. Sometimes stuff happens in the swamp, they just ignore it. She comes back home and looks out the window. She sees what she described to me as green cones of light that were walking out of the swamp and down the road. My grandma, as you can imagine, shits a brick and screams for her parents. The whole family watches as these cones of light vanish. The next day, it was the talk of half the village. My grandma believes that those were the ghosts of people who drowned in the swamp. Another story. This one happened when I was around 10. I was coming back from the doctor with my parents. As we were riding, we noticed a weird shadow on the road. I turn and look back, and then in the sky, there is a really weird eye-shaped black object with something that looks like a red iris in the center. I scream. My mom looks back. She also sees it. She tells my dad to go faster. He goes as fast as he can. The car is shaking, while this thing is simply floating behind us, seemingly effortless. And then, as quickly as we had seen it, it seems to get tired of us or bored, and then goes toward the railroad tracks and vanishes over the trees. I still have no idea what that could have been. Story number 3. This one is also about a UFO. It happened to me when I was 16. It was All Saints' Day, so myself and my parents are going to the cemetery. We go there and put down some candles. While in there, we notice that it's surprisingly hot, even outside the cemetery. We think nothing of this. We start going back home. It's now around 11 p.m. We're nearing the factory grounds when we see that people are pointing at something in the sky. We all think, oh great, what's going on now? We look up. There is a ball of yellow or golden light hovering right beside the factory stack. It seems to be crackling or burning with the same light. I think to myself, we're all screwed. It moves from side to side, passing behind the stack and then above us. This goes on for a minute or two, and then it becomes half of its previous size and speeds off across the sky, looking like a Star Wars ship that's somehow entering hyperdrive. People are either speechless or freaked out. The next day, I learned that one of my favorite teachers, who was an astronomy fan and a believer in aliens, had a heart attack on his balcony, and I think I know why. This next one is from when I visited a friend of mine whose dad is into forestry.
Now my nickname for him is Jay, so that's what I'll call him here. We're both 17 at this time. I was staying at his house, which the back of the house is quite literally right up against the woods. His dad goes into the forest to check for poachers and other stuff like that. Since we're both just weirdos, we go to the porch and wait for him, just talking about stuff that teenagers talk about and all that. At this point it's around midnight, and after a whole day of screwing around and hunting, it gets to us. Jay falls asleep, and I get up to go to the bathroom. I go to the toilet, and as I leave, I hear this weird sound, like somebody is laughing to themselves. I look out into the driveway, and I'd see nothing. I shrug it off, thinking, that's weird, and I go back toward the toilet, and then something slams onto the roof. I go out back into the porch to find Jay scared out of his pants, saying that there's something on the roof. We both go outside to look. We're thinking that there's some kind of animal or something else surely has to be out there. You can see a shadow, but it's hiding behind a chimney, and then it seems to jump off. We go around the house to get only a glimpse at something. There's this, I think it was a person, maybe, 2 meters tall, and they were dressed in some kind of shitty looking brown or green clothing, but clothing isn't really the word for it, more like just a covering. It had hair all over its body, and it was messy as all hell. There was leaves and mud smeared all over him, and on its head he was wearing a crown type thing of dirty deer antlers. He threw something at us along with a piece of bone, and then runs off on all fours, cackling like some kind of wild animal. We of course just nope the hell out of there, prepare his dad's gun, and wait at the door. But at some point, we fall asleep. When he comes back, we tell him what happened. He's surprised. He tries to play it off and says that we must have dreamed it. Later on, I talk to Jay, and he agrees that his dad knows something and isn't telling us the whole story. We keep asking, but his dad just gets angry and tells us to lay off. We have no choice. Years later, I still have no idea what it was about or why he wouldn't tell us anything. And this is the last one I have for you. This is the only time that I can say that I saw a monster, possibly. I was 22 at this time, and I was living in the suburbs that are near some woods. I was alone in my house since my parents were visiting their friends, and I heard this really weird noise. It sounded like rusty metal, except more alive, I guess is the word for it. I look outside, and I see a gray shape covered in hair. It does the weird rust sound again. It then gets up. I'm 195 centimeters tall, and I'm shorter than our fence. When this thing straightens, it's 30 centimeters taller than our fence, and then its head does a 180 degrees swivel like an owl. Its head is spherical, with a pair of giant round eyes, which have a black sclera and full white dilated irises. From what I see, I don't see a mouth or nose or ears or anything else. And then this thing lifts up its arm while still turned around, climbs over the fence, and just kind of F's off into the night. I drew a picture of this thing. It's not the best, but it's what I can do. I still have no idea what this is. So I have this old hunting story, and I feel like it's possibly related to the Wendigo. I was 17 years old, and my father and I had been hunting in Tongass, Alaska, during deer season. We were a few miles away from camp, and already were returning from a successful hunt, with only a couple hours of sunlight left. I decided to stay behind for a bit to map the spot we had so much success with, and I guess to sort of test the directional skills my dad had been teaching me since forever, so he went on ahead. Around 20 minutes later, I finished my mapping and started heading back, cradling my rifle as I walked, watching my steps because it was pretty damp at the time. And suddenly, I heard something, twigs snapping to my right, and I instantly get on my knees and hunker in some brush, because at that moment, I had seen the biggest buck I had ever seen in my life. It was behind a considerably large tree from my point of view. All I could see was the head looking out into the forest in the direction that my dad went. I carefully raised my rifle, and as I looked through my scope, I immediately knew that something was terribly off. Its eyes were a murky white, and the lining of its mouth showed signs of an infection or dehydration. I guess you could say the lining of its mouth was gunky, and to top it off, the fur was much thicker and untamed. And then it happened. It started moving. It came out from behind the tree, gaining massive amounts of height, and walking only on its hind legs. It was about 6'7" or so. The overall look to it was that it was a deer carcass. It started walking in the direction of my dad. I wasn't afraid at this point. I had heard of some, quote, hardcore hunters in the area that would wear deer carcass as camo, so I lowered my rifle and yelled to it, "Hey!" In that split moment, it turned to me and snarled like a demon hound. I raised my rifle and fired a warning shot because I sure as hell had never heard that sound before in my entire life. It wasn't fazed in the slightest, and in that split moment, it turned to advance toward me. I had no idea what the hell was going on at that point, because a large chunk of its rib cage looked like it had been mauled off, but it still had enough strength to go apeshit. I relied on rationality, and I decided that it was a buck with rabies or something, just anything that I could do to keep me from being afraid. I assessed that at that point I was in danger, and as it got down and started running on all fours toward me, I fired a second shot and wounded it. It made the usual wounded buck noise, freaked out in some brush for a moment, and then got up and ran in the other direction on all fours. At that point, I just put it into my head that it was a wounded buck, and since I had taken a shot at it, I was then responsible for finishing the job, so I pursued it. I followed its blood trail to a nearby clearing, but I stopped dead in my tracks because I heard a commotion involving a bear a few hundred yards ahead. It sounded like a territorial fight, so I got my scent downwind and patched my pits and groin with mud and started heading back. I was not about to F with a bear. I found my father and told him the whole story, and he decided that we should head back because a wounded animal is a hunter's responsibility, but it was too late, so we saved it for the morning. The next morning, the old man and I made it to where I had first spotted it. I explained everything in detail, and he too figured it was just some sort of sick buck. We examined the foliage where it breakdanced in pain and found odd, very thin clumps of hair that smelled like mold. My dad said he'd never seen fur like that before and added some of it to his pouch. Then we followed the blood trail. We got to the point where I stopped and I showed him the direction where the bear commotion had occurred, and he then pointed out to me that the blood trail went in the same direction. We both looked at each other in a moment of relief, because it seemed like that nature may have corrected itself and ended my hunt. We followed the blood to a clearing, and my dad stopped quickly and put his hand on my shoulder and pointed further out, about 30 yards away, to a dead brown bear. We made our way over to it and examined it in total disbelief. It had been mauled severely. Its stomach had been completely gutted, and its entrails littered the ground around it. Its jawline was severely damaged, like something was able to grab both parts and break its jaw with sheer force. My father and I looked at each other for a moment. We were frightened, and we immediately dismissed our hunt and headed home. To this day, I have no idea what could have possibly done that, but it does make for a good story. In 2018, I had an experience with what I can only believe to be a Wendigo in southern Tennessee. I was 20 at the time. I was home on leave from the military. My buddies and I had been planning a camping trip for some time now. I started asking around and posting online if there was anyone with land that we could camp on. After some time, my mom finally hears back from a friend that we could camp on his land. He has a large parcel, about 400 acres. Everyone is excited. The day before we go is super rainy and overcast. We're really hoping that the rain clears up so we can still go, and miraculously, it does. My buddies and I load up in the car and head south. We are all excited as we're all from a large city in Tennessee and don't really get out to nature much. So we're driving along the freeway and we notice the amount of trees grow in density every mile. The four of us meet up with the landowner. I've never met this guy before, but he's a southern nice guy. We follow him in his pickup truck for about 20 minutes outside of this one stop sign town. After we leave that area, we're basically in the middle of nowhere now. We arrive at this gate that's on the side of the road. The landowner's brother is waiting there. The guy is kinda creepy looking, and so is the gate, but we think whatever. We got 400 acres to play around in. They take us about 150 yards to the tree line in their pickups, and then drop us off. Good luck, have fun, basically. After they leave, we set off into the woods, looking for a clear spot to set up our base. We find the perfect spot, and get to work. Now my dumbass only brought a tarp and a blanket. About 4 hours later, my lean-to is complete. But for them, it only took about 10 minutes to set up their tents and hammocks. We find out then that one of my friends had never been hunting before, so I decided to take him. Me and Rick set out with a rifle to try and find something to hunt. It's a .223. We brought 2 rifles, but left one at base camp. We're trudging along through the mud and thick brush, and then we realize there's no noise. It's completely quiet. I hear movement and see leaves rustle, but there's no animal to be seen. I think it must have been a squirrel. We continue. Nothing eventful happens. We walk back to our base. There's no leaves or foliage, just bare trees, tightly packed in a dense cluster. We have trouble finding the base on the way back, and then I hear talking and follow the sound, distant murmuring. But as we're following it, we realize that it sounds female, which we think that's not right at all. This creeps us out. We go the opposite direction, and we end up finding our camp. My other friends have a fire going good. They're cooking up bacon, and I think, that's weird. I didn't smell anything until we were right up on the fire. We all hang out until nighttime. I thought that we had brought more food than bacon and a few eggs, but oh well. My other friends are getting hungry, and it's already dark out. They decide to hike out to the car and go get food. I decide that I'll stay and keep the fire going. I have them take my phone to charge it. It was charged before we left, but I guess the cold weather must have killed the battery or something. I don't really understand it. They leave, making all the noise in the world while doing so. And I think, well, there goes my chance to hunt at night. So I'm just sitting there, by the fire, feeding it what little dry wood we found. The temperature is dropping rapidly. It's already 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's dropping further. But this isn't weird, since it's winter. But then I notice something from before. The eerie silence sets in. My ears begin to ring from the silence. There's no wind. There's no branches falling. Nothing. I'm feeling a little weird, spooked, but I maintain my composure. And then I hear a strange noise. It sounded like just a whisper at first, like a whispered death rattle, like somebody with asthma is being waterboarded after a marathon. And then I hear the distant sound of branches breaking. I think and hope that my bros are back with dinner, but it was coming from the wrong direction. I grabbed the rifle and a flashlight. I rack the charging handle quietly. My frozen hand slips off the handle and makes the loudest noise possible. And then I begin to look around with the flashlight. And then the absolute most stereotypical horror movie thing happens. My battery dies, and I think, great, here we go. I sit down by the fire to try and keep warm. My ears are wide open. There's no more movement, but there's slight whispers all around. The noises die down. I'm thinking that I must have some kind of PTSD, and these are just side effects of it. I'm sitting by the fire for another 5 minutes. I hear a noise in front of me. I ready my rifle and look up from the fire, and I think, what in God's name is standing in front of me? I see the legs of a deer attached to the decaying torso of a deer, but it almost looks human in a way. I can't explain it. It has these arms that dangle down, like almost skeletal, flesh coming off them. The head was the worst part. It looked like a deer with almost coyote-like features, with antlers. The hair on its body was half fallen off, half covered in blood. 5 seconds of looking at this thing, and my training kicks in. I hammered a pair, 2 shots to the chest. It stands there, breathing heavily now. I just let loose and mag dump the thing. There's a hideous scream. It sounded like the mix of a deer and a human with the high pitchedness of a coyote. I reload my gun. I have to mag dump it again. It retreats back into the woods. Noise erupts all around me. The wind flows heavy. The trees begin to creak under the immense streams of wind. I hear distant coyote noises, deer noises, and human screams from before. And then, nothing. The world around me continues as normal. My friends finally arrive 10 minutes later. I have no way to tell the time as my phone is with them, but they brought Taco Bell, and they asked me, did anything happen while we were gone? And I said, no. It was a pretty quiet night. They asked curiously about the shell casings. They can tell from the look on my face that something happened, but I just tell them, I got bored. I stay up the entire night, stoking the fire as much as I can and keeping watch. At the first light of the sun, I got the hell out of there. I was never going to stay there any longer. I haven't been back since, but maybe these days I'd be willing to go again if I could get into contact with the landowner. I haven't heard from him in over a year. I don't know if what I saw was just a half-dead deer in the firelight, or if it was truly a Wendigo. Are they even in Tennessee? I don't know. The whole thing was scarring. So my buddy is a Native American, and he's told me some pretty wild stories, and he gave the okay to tell one that happened to his late grandfather. I couldn't tell you how many years ago this was, but let's start. So, my friend's grandfather was living on a reservation. He was an active hunter and a very active participant in the local religion and folklore. He took the supernatural very seriously, and by the time of this, winter had finally come. It was 23 degrees Fahrenheit on this particular day. Light snow was coming down while he was moving through private land that was owned by the res. He was hunting alone because he considered hunting with people to be a distraction. His words, not mine. His route was to walk through a man-made dirt road and then take an offbeat trail, moving off the road for maybe 4 miles. After that, he would go up into his man-made tree stand. It was literally just 4 planks of wood held up by supports and a rope that's attached to the tree. But you do what you gotta do. So he's making his way to this. He's been walking for maybe 2.25 miles, and this feeling starts to grow in his gut. The feeling of unrest or dread of the surroundings. He's not paranoid, but he's getting cautious. He begins to slow down his pace as he's getting closer and closer to his stand. The feeling has started to steadily grow. He noticed that even with how quiet the winter woods can be, this time it felt different, empty. They had a word for it, but I don't remember what it was, but it meant abandoned. This really unnerves his grandfather. After finally making it to his stand, he just climbs the rope, no ladder, just like the Chad he was. He sits on the boards and loads the rifle. He feels a little safer now, like he can breathe, now that his rifle is at the ready. He sits there for hours, I think, and then this smell starts to raise its head all around him. It smells like dead animals. The smell is moving in a circle, like the smell will rise in severity and then just go away and then repeat. He's getting really fed up with this smell. He slowly starts to see little bits of movement, just here and there. Off a few yards into the forest, he sees deer antlers. He gets excited. He pulls out the deer antlers to rattle the buck in. He rattles loud enough to reach the buck. The buck raises its head from behind fallen trees and forest debris. He's getting really excited now. He keeps rattling. The buck moves up more. But then, his grandfather gets very confused. The deer's neck is really long. It keeps rising and moving out of the brush. And then the deer stands up. It's on its hind legs, and its forearms end not with hooves, but humanistic hands. It takes 2 large steps, stepping over the debris and fallen trees. His grandfather automatically knows what this is. As he thinks about it, the creature sheds its fur and the flesh falls away, revealing a dark gray skin covered in dried blood with rotting flesh hanging off of its body. It's very emaciated and bony. Its head loses its deer-like exterior and reveals a skull with broken antlers on it. The skull has very tight skin that almost seems like it's wrapped around it. The lower jaw looks like a human's, but when opened, the lower jaw splits and looks like something straight out of the Predator. It finally opens its eyes, a dull yellow glaze coming from the abysses on its face. There's blood dripping onto the snow, causing steam to come off of the blood. When it walks, its bones are cracking and snapping, and simultaneously it seems to be healing the bones, like the bones are moving inside of its leg. Its stomach is stretched and somewhat bloated, like a beer gut, but covered in blood, spots, and undulating. The creature begins kind of investigating the area that his grandfather rattled to lure it near. The skin of the deer lays on the snow. It looks like a fur pelt that hasn't been skinned and readied yet. It crinkly walks around all jagged, just kind of meandering around, smelling the air. The smell is nose-meltingly strong. His grandfather has to cover his face with his shirt, but even then, it seeps through. The creature eventually kind of just wanders away. After sitting for a while longer, he decides that it's most likely time to leave and get the hell out of there. He keeps moving through the snow. The snow is finally picking up, and almost a full-on blizzard. He's been out there for maybe about 8 hours. The sun is going down fast. He speeds up and is lightly jogging, and then trips over something. He gets up out of the snow to see just what tripped him. It's a frozen body, a young hunter that had been missing for weeks before with another guy. This terrifies him, and he speeds up even more. He theorizes that he has half a mile until his truck. He finally makes it to the truck and takes off. He makes it back to the reservation. The res police were literally about to leave and search for him. He tells them and his elder what happened. He gets a chant or something put on him to protect his soul. His grandfather never told anyone else. The only reason why he told my friend is because his grandfather and my friend got really drunk one night all these years later, and he spilled the story.